The heart monitor was counting down my death, but my wife watched it with a chilling calm. She leaned close, the scent of white lilies mixing with the contempt in her voice. "Look at yourself, Edward, an old lion rotting on a mountain of money. Don't make me stare at this pathetic version of you for another second." She smiled, convinced she had cornered a dying man. But she had no idea the button on my chest was recording every insult, the same words that would drag her from a luxury mansion straight into a dark prison cell. "Your presence here means more than you know. Tell me in the comments, what country or city are you from? Let's see how many corners of the world this story has reached." Note some elements of this story are fictional, added for narrative and educational purposes. Any similarity to existing names or locations is coincidental, but the lesson inside it belongs to all of us. The heart monitor beeped at exactly 11 counts per minute. I know because I counted them. When a man has nothing left but time and the faint burning ache behind his sternum, he counts everything: ceiling tiles, footsteps in the hallway, the measured percussion of a machine that has been assigned the task of announcing he is still alive. Room 412, Houston Methodist Hospital. VIP wing 12th floor. The kind of room that smells of fresh orchids and institutional antiseptic in equal measure, a combination I had come to associate over 3 weeks with the particular theater of serious illness. The orchids were Victoria's, white, cold, perfect. I had not touched the card she sent with them. Outside the window, Houston was waking up in its slow coastal way, the skyline emerging from morning haze, steel towers catching the first flat light of a December dawn. I had watched this view every morning for 22 days. I had counted the buildings too. The diagnosis was not what occupied my mind. Acute myeloid leukemia, aggressive subtype. Dr. Raymond Cole had delivered it 11 days before my admission, sitting across from me in his office with his hands folded on the desk, the posture of a man who has rehearsed difficult conversations until they no longer frighten him, though they still cost him something. 6 to 8 weeks without a matched donor, he had said, and with one, a better odds, significantly. Then find one. He had looked at me for a moment. "Your HLA profile is unusual, Edward. We've run the national registry. No unrelated match." No unrelated match. I had filed that phrase away and said nothing. Not because I had accepted it, but because acceptance had never been my first response to an obstacle. What occupied my mind this morning was a phone call. 3 nights before my admission, 11:40 p.m. Victoria's voice carrying clearly through the gap under the study door. I had heard 7 words that rearranged every priority I had carried into that hospital bed. "He needs to sign before he deteriorates." I had stood in the hallway in my robe, hand flat against the wall, and listened to my wife discuss the timeline of my decline with the precision of a project manager. I had not let her see me standing there. I had gone back to bed, closed my eyes, and begun in the silence behind my own breathing to plan. 30 years of morning meditation had given me one reliable skill above all others: the ability to remain completely still while my mind moved at full speed. I used it now, lying in room 412, with the monitor beeping its patient count, my face arranged in the expression of a man surrendering to circumstance. I was not surrendering. I was setting the board. The door at the end of the hallway opened, heels on tile, triple tap, pause. A rhythm I had memorized in the first year of our marriage when it still meant something warm. Victoria, I thought, right on time. I closed my eyes, slowed my breath to 8 counts per exhale, and let the performance begin. She came in carrying white lilies. Not because she knew they were my favorite. I had told her once in the 2nd year of our marriage that I preferred simple flowers to elaborate arrangements. She had remembered. That was the thing about Victoria that had always unsettled me, even in the years when I still called it admiration. She remembered everything useful and discarded everything that wasn't. "Good morning, darling." She set the lilies on the windowsill beside the orchids and turned to me with the smile she reserved for rooms that might be watching. Warm, concerned, perfectly calibrated. "Morning," I said. My voice came out thin, not entirely performance. The ache behind my sternum had been real since day one. She sat in the chair beside the bed and took my hand. Her fingers were cool and dry. She smelled of the French perfume I had bought her on our 5th anniversary, which she had continued wearing long after I suspected she had stopped thinking of it as mine. "How did you sleep?" she asked. "Poorly," I said. "The medication." She nodded her thumb, moving across my knuckles, in a gesture so practiced it had become reflex. Dr. Cole called me this morning. He said your numbers are down again. He mentioned that. Edward. She leaned slightly forward. We need to think practically about what happens if... The door opened. Ray came in without ceremony, chart under his arm, eyes moving across the room in a single professional sweep before settling on me. He acknowledged Victoria with a brief nod. Good morning, I'll be quick. He pulled a single form from the chart and placed it on my bedside tray. Edward, this is a standard hypo authorization form. It allows Victoria to receive updates on your medical status directly from our nursing team. Given your current condition, it simplifies communication considerably. Victoria's hand, still holding mine, went very slightly still. I picked up the form. I read it slowly, or appeared to. In reality, Ray and I had reviewed an identical form the night before at 11 p.m., speaking in low voices about exactly what signing it would and would not accomplish. Of course, I said. I signed. Victoria exhaled, barely audible, the sound of a woman releasing tension she had not wanted visible. Thank you, she said to Ray. We'll be in touch, he said. Then to me, his eyes holding mine 1 second longer than the conversation required. Rest well, Edward. He left. Victoria squeezed my hand. I'm glad that's handled, she said softly. Now I can stay properly informed, take care of you the right way. I know you will, I said. I looked at the lilies in the window. She had no way of knowing this form would be quietly revoked in 72 hours, after which every piece of medical information she received would require Marcus to break federal law to obtain it. The first piece of the trap had been placed. Victoria left at 9:15, exactly 40 minutes after she arrived. I knew her schedule the way I knew the monitors beeping by repetition, by patience, by the particular attention a man develops when he understands that the person across the table is playing a different game than the one on the board. Claire came in 7 minutes later. She moved the way she always moved, quietly, efficiently, taking stock of the room before she spoke. 6 years as my personal assistant had given her a particular economy of motion that I had come to rely on, the way I relied on a good contract, precise, dependable, nothing wasted. She set the morning papers on the bedside table and began organizing the breakfast tray without being asked. Victoria seemed satisfied, she said. Not a question. She was, I said, hand me the Chronicle. Claire passed it without comment. I turned to the business section, habit 35 years of it, and scanned the headlines. Quarterly earnings, a federal infrastructure bill, a real estate dispute in Galveston County. And then on page 7, a photograph stopped me cold. It was a small image accompanying an article about a federal financial litigation conference in Dallas. 3 attorneys standing outside a courthouse mid-conversation, caught by the camera in an unguarded moment. The caption named them left to right. I didn't read the caption first. I read the wrist. The woman on the left, dark blazer gray at her temples, the posture of someone who had never once in her life been uncertain about where she was going, had her left arm raised slightly, gesturing towards something outside the frame, and on her left wrist, just visible below her cuff, was a thin strand of red thread, tied in a knot I had invented at the age of 5, a knot I had never taught to anyone. My hand went flat against the page. I had tied that knot myself on a February night in 1971, in a room that smelled of floor wax and baby powder, with a piece of thread pulled from the hem of my own shirt. I had wrapped it around a tiny wrist and whispered something I no longer remembered word for word, but had never forgotten in feeling. I'll find you. Claire, I said. My voice came out lower than I intended. She turned from the window. I held up the newspaper folded to page 7, my finger beside the photograph. Find me this woman, everything you can. 48 hours. Claire crossed the room and looked at the photograph. Something moved across her face, too brief and too controlled for me to name it. Her name is in the caption, she said carefully. Margaret Hartwell, federal financial attorney. She's based in Washington, D.C. I looked at her. How do you know that without reading it? I said. Claire said nothing for 3 full seconds. 48 hours, I repeated quietly. Claire. Yes, sir, she said, and she left without another word. I looked back at the photograph, at the red thread, at the knot only I knew how to tie. 50 years, I thought, and she kept it. The hospital went quiet after 10 p.m. Not silent hospitals are never silent, but the daytime frequency of footsteps and cartwheels and overlapping voices settled into something lower, more measured. The night shift had its own rhythm. I had learned it over 3 weeks the way I had learned everything useful in my life, by paying attention when no one thought I was. I waited until 11:30. Then I reached under the pillow and removed the Patek Philippe. It was a 1987 model gold face cream dial, the kind of watch that announced itself without trying. Victoria had given it to me on our 10th anniversary, which I had always found faintly ironic given what it had become. I turned it over in my hands once, then set it on the bedside table face up, positioned at the angle most visible from the doorway. The Patek was a decoy. Inside its casing was a small RF transmitter, enough signal to register on a handheld detector, not enough to actually record anything. I had arranged this through a man named Doyle, a private security contractor Ray had used twice before on sensitive corporate matters, who arrived on day 9 dressed as a medical equipment technician and left 40 minutes later with nothing that wasn't already there. If Marcus swept the room, and I was certain he would, because Marcus was careful in the way that small, ambitious men are careful, he would find the watch, disable it, and leave, believing he had neutralized the threat. He would be wrong. The actual recording device was the third button on my hospital gown. A MEMS microphone circuit board, thinner than a playing card, cellular uplink to an encrypted server in Dallas. Claire brought a fresh gown every morning and took the previous one out in the laundry bag. Each evening in the parking structure on level 2, she transferred the day's audio files to the server. The arrangement was legal. I had confirmed this twice, once with Ray, once with Agent Briggs of the FBI's Houston field office, who had visited me on a Tuesday afternoon dressed as a hospital chaplain, and had reviewed the Texas one-party consent statute with the thoroughness of a man who intended to use the recordings in federal court. Claire is present in the room during most of these conversations, Briggs had asked. She is. Then she's a consenting party. Everything captured is admissible. He had shaken my hand before leaving and said with the flat effect of a career federal agent, "Mr. Hartwell, you are either very smart or very reckless." "Can't it be both?" I had said. He had not smiled, but his eyes had. Now I lay in the dark and looked at the Patek on the table, the beautiful, useless, perfectly positioned decoy, and thought about Marcus running his detector across it and walking away satisfied. Let him find it, I thought. Let him think he's winning. I closed my eyes. Victoria thought she was visiting a dying man. She was walking into a courtroom. She thought I was asleep. That was the foundation of everything. Victoria's absolute certainty that the man in the bed was too medicated, too exhausted, too far gone to register anything beyond the next dose of painkillers. She had built her entire plan on that certainty. I had spent 30 years building companies on the miscalculations of people who underestimated me. This was no different. It was 11:30 p.m. on day 2 when she made the call. I had been lying still for 40 minutes, breathing at the rate Ray and I had discussed, slow, deep, the rhythm of genuine sleep. 30 years of meditation had made this effortless. I could lower my heart rate, relax every visible muscle, and keep my mind running at full speed simultaneously. The monitor confirmed what she needed to see, steady, slow, unremarkable. She moved to the sofa, in the corner of the room, turned her back to the bed, and pressed the phone to her ear. "It's me," she said, low, controlled. "He's out. Marcus." I recognized the pattern. She always opened that way with him. Economical. No names. "The authorization form is done," she continued. "Cole will update me directly from tomorrow." A pause while Marcus spoke. "No, we need both instruments, medical and financial. Walsh confirmed he can have them ready within 10 days. Another pause. "Because the medical alone isn't enough, Marcus. I need the financial POA to move the assets before the board meeting." I kept my breathing even. 4 counts in, 7 counts hold, 8 counts out. Both instruments I noted, medical power of attorney and financial power of attorney, separate documents, separate authorities. She had done her research. I filed that away. Walsh said the witnesses are arranged. Victoria continued. "Independent notary 2 signatories. Everything clean." She listened. Then quieter. "Walsh is handling the other matter as well." The other matter. A cold line moved through my chest that had nothing to do with the leukemia. "Don't call this number again after midnight," she said. "The nursing staff logs visitor calls on the ward system." A pause. "Yes, 10 days. Stay patient." She ended the call. I heard her set the phone face down on the cushion beside her. The small sounds of a woman composing herself, one slow breath, the adjustment of her posture, the deliberate return to stillness. 3 minutes later, she stood across the room and looked down at me. I kept my eyes closed, kept my breathing slow. She stood there for perhaps 15 seconds. I could feel her attention the way you feel a change in air pressure present assessing clinical. Then she leaned down and kissed my forehead. Her lips were cold. "Sleep well," she said softly. She gathered her bag and left. The door clicked shut. I opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling in the dark. Walsh is handling the other matter. I reached for the secondary phone and typed a single message to Ray: "Call Walsh tomorrow morning, early, before she does." Then I closed my eyes again. The garden Victoria had been planting for 4 years was almost fully grown. It was time to introduce the frost. Claire came to me at 6:15 the next morning, before Victoria arrived, before the nursing shift changed, before the hospital found its daytime rhythm. She closed the door behind her and stood at the foot of the bed, with her hands folded, the posture she used when she had something to say that she hadn't fully decided how to say. "Margaret Hartwell," she said, "federal financial attorney, IRS special counsel by contract. Based in Washington, D.C., she handles asset fraud and corporate embezzlement cases." She paused. "She's been doing it for 20 years. I watched her face. "How much of that did you already know?" before I asked. Claire looked at the window. A long 3 seconds. "Most of it," she said quietly. "How long?" She reached into her jacket pocket and removed a photograph, small old, the edges worn soft with handling. She held it out. I took it. 2 children standing before an iron gate painted green. A boy, perhaps 5. A girl infant held in his arms. The photograph was black and white, but I knew with the certainty of someone recognizing his own history exactly what color the thread on the girl's wrist had been. My throat tightened. "Where did you get this?" I said. She gave it to me," Claire said. 2 years ago, when she sent me here." The room was very quiet. "And she sent you?" I repeated. "She found you through a Golden Grill filing a federal case she was consulting on. She recognized the name Hartwell." Claire kept her eyes on the window. "She spent 8 months confirming it was you. Then she spent another 4 months deciding what to do about it." A pause. "She was afraid, Mr. Hartwell. She didn't know if you would want to be found." I looked at the photograph, at the boy holding the girl, at the thread. "Well, sir, so she sent you instead," I said. "She asked me to come work for you, to make sure you were her word safe, that you were someone worth approaching." Claire finally looked at me directly. "I've been here 5 years. I told her 6 months ago that you were. And she still didn't come." "No," Claire said. "She was still afraid." I set the photograph down on the blanket between us. "Call her," I said. "Today. Tell her I need her help, both the medical kind and the legal kind." I looked up. "And Claire, tell her I kept looking too. For 50 years I kept looking." Claire picked up the photograph and carefully returned it to her pocket. "She'll want to hear that," she said. "I know," I said. "That's why I'm saying it." Quinn called me at 11 a.m. Not Briggs Quinn. That distinction mattered. Briggs collected evidence. Quinn built prosecutions. When Quinn called directly, it meant the machinery had advanced a stage. Gerald Quinn, Assistant U.S. Attorney, Southern District of Texas. His voice was flat and deliberate, the voice of a man who had trained himself not to let inflection reveal anything before he was ready. "Agent Briggs tells me you refuse to move on the penthouse footage." "It's correct," I said. "Hey, walk me through your reasoning." "If you arrest now, Walsh disappears into a privilege argument for 8 months. Marcus takes a lesser plea before you build the full picture. Victoria's defense finds a procedural gap, and she walks in 36 months. I paused. "I don't want Victoria to walk in 36 months. "What do you want?" "Every layer on the record," I said. "The POA fraud, the asset transfers, medical tampering, all of it documented before a single arrest is made." I kept my voice even. "I want a jury to hear the full 4 years, not a summary." Quinn was quiet, the silence of a man arriving at an answer he had already run several times. "That the penthouse footage alone gives us conspiracy to commit murder," he said. "That's a federal warrant today." "It is," I said, "and in 18 months after her attorneys finish with it, you'll have convictions on 2 of 6 charges. And if we wait, you'll have everything," I said. "Wire fraud, 43 documented asset transfers, medical tampering on camera, a cooperative witness inside our own legal team." I stopped. "Give me 3 weeks, Mr. Quinn." Another silence. Longer. 3 weeks, he said. "Nothing moves without my office knowing first." A pause. "One more thing. You need eyes inside that penthouse before the next meeting, not just audio-video. If they discuss the medical modification on camera a second time, it closes every argument her defense will make about the first recording." I know, I said. I'm handling that today. Yeah, how we A pen, I said. A brief silence. Quinn did not ask the follow-up question. Keep Briggs informed, he said, and he ended the call. I typed a message to Claire. I need a Mont Blanc pen. Black lacquer, identical to the ones already on Marcus's conference table. Tonight. Her response came in 4 minutes. I know the model. I've been in that conference room. I'll have it by tonight. I read the message twice. She had been in his conference room. She had noted the pens on the table. She had filed it away and said nothing, waiting for the moment it would be needed. 6 years of that. 6 years of Claire moving quietly through every room that mattered, seeing everything, storing what was useful, asking nothing in return. I typed back, "Thank you, Claire." She didn't respond. She never responded to thank yous. She simply moved to the next thing that needed doing, which was, I had come to understand, its own kind of answer. The penthouse was on the 40th floor of a building 3 miles from the hospital. I knew this because Claire had followed Victoria there twice in the past week, quietly at a distance the way Claire did everything. The building had a rooftop bar visible from the highway. Marcus had leased the unit 18 months ago, 4 months after Victoria and I returned from our last trip together. I had noticed the timing later. At the time, I had noticed nothing. That was the version of me I was done being. Claire had placed the pen on Marcus's conference table 2 days before the meeting. Access had come through the building's facilities. Manager Claire had arranged a routine inspection visit under Golden Grill's corporate property division, which held a service contract with the building. She was inside for 11 minutes. A Mont Blanc black lacquer, identical to the 3 others already in the cup beside the notepad. Inside its barrel was a camera the size of a grain of rice, transmitting to a receiver in Claire's bag in the parking structure below. I watched the feed from my secondary phone propped against the water pitcher on my bedside table. The meeting began at 2 p.m. Walsh arrived first, charcoal suit, briefcase the careful expression of a man who had not yet decided which side of a line he was standing on. Victoria came in 2 minutes later. Marcus poured wine without asking. The documents, Victoria said, no preamble. Walsh opened his briefcase and laid 2 folders on the table. Medical power of attorney and financial and business power of attorney, both complete. Independent notary, 2 witnesses fully executable. He tapped the financial folder. Once signed and filed, you have full authority over all corporate assets, transfers, and decisions. Victoria picked up the financial folder and turned pages with the speed of someone looking for specific numbers, not reading language. Timeline, she said. 10 days to prepare Edward's signature, Walsh said. Given his current condition, we present it as routine estate planning. Marcus leaned back in his chair. And if he's not cooperative? And Walsh chose his words carefully. There are supplementary measures. A competency assessment from an independent physician, Dr. Howard Bellamy, has agreed to evaluate. If Edward's cognition is determined to be compromised, the court can appoint Victoria as legal guardian without his signature. Victoria set the folder down. Good. Then Marcus said, what about the other matter? Victoria looked at Walsh. Walsh looked at the table. A modification to his anticoagulant dosage, Walsh said quietly. Subtle enough to appear as natural deterioration. Dr. Bellamy has the specifics. No one spoke for 4 seconds. Then Victoria said, move forward. I set the phone face down on the blanket. My hand was completely steady. 30 years of meditation. 30 years of learning that the moment you show your reaction is the moment you lose the room. I picked up the secondary phone and typed to Agent Briggs I have video. Full meeting, Walsh, Victoria, Marcus. They discussed the anticoagulant modification on camera. His response came in 40 seconds. Don't move. I'm coming to you tonight. Task 2.5. Briggs arrived at 11 p.m., dressed as a hospital chaplain. He was a solid man, 50s gray at the temples, with the kind of face that revealed nothing and absorbed everything. He carried a Bible he never opened and sat in the visitor's chair with the relaxed posture of someone who had conducted sensitive conversations in worse locations than a VIP hospital room. The video, he said. I handed him the secondary phone. He watched the penthouse footage without expression, all 14 minutes of it. Walsh presenting the folders, Victoria turning pages, Marcus asking about the other matter. The 4-second silence before Victoria said, move forward. When it finished, he handed the phone back. That's conspiracy to commit murder, he said. 1st degree, Federal jurisdiction because the anticoagulant modification constitutes tampering with medical treatment across state-licensed facilities. He paused. We can arrest all three tonight. Didn't know him, I said. He looked at me. Not yet, I said. If you move now, Walsh disappears into his attorney's office, Marcus takes a plea, and Victoria walks out in 3 years on a technicality her lawyers will find before Christmas. I kept my voice level. I want the full picture on the record, every layer, the POA fraud, the asset transfers, the sample tampering, all of it visible before anyone is arrested. Briggs was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to let a murder plot develop further before I stop it. I'm asking you to let it fully document itself, I said. There's a difference. Not always, he said. In this case, there is, I said. Because I'm still alive, Agent Briggs, and I intend to stay that way. The transplant will happen before they can execute their medical plan. I'll make sure of that. What I need from you is a wiretap authorization covering Victoria, Marcus, and Walsh. Full surveillance. Everything they say from this point forward becomes federal evidence. He studied me for a long moment with the evaluating stillness of a man running calculations. The video alone gives us probable cause, he said finally. I can have the wiretap authorization from a federal judge by tomorrow morning. Good. And Walsh, he said. Where does he stand? He hasn't decided yet, I said. Give me until morning. I'll call him before Victoria does. Briggs stood, tucked the Bible under his arm, and looked at me with something that was not quite admiration, but was close enough to be interesting. Mr. Hartwell, he said, most people in your position would be focused entirely on surviving the illness. I am focused on surviving, I said. I'm simply being thorough about it. He almost smiled. I'll have the authorization by 6 a.m. He left. The door clicked shut. I lay back and looked at the ceiling. Tomorrow I would call Walsh and offer him the only thing Victoria couldn't weigh out. Task 2.6. I called Walsh at 5:50 a.m. He answered on the second ring, which told me he hadn't slept either. Edward. His voice was careful, neutral, the voice of a man standing at a crossroads in the dark. Donovan, I said. I watched the meeting yesterday, all 14 minutes. Silence, long enough that I could hear him breathing. Is the pen on the table? He said finally, not a question. The pen on the table, I confirmed. Another silence. Outside my window, Houston was beginning its slow gray dawn, the same skyline I had watched every morning for 3 weeks, patient and indifferent and entirely unchanged by the things happening in the rooms below it. Edward, I want you to know that I know what you haven't done yet, I said. That's why I'm calling you now instead of Agent Briggs. I kept my voice even. You have 2 options, Donovan. The first, continue with Victoria's plan. The wiretap authorization covering you was filed at 6 a.m. this morning. Everything you say from this point forward is federal evidence. Conspiracy to commit murder carries 25 years minimum at the federal level. You would not work again. You would not see your grandchildren graduate. I heard him exhale. The second option, I said. Yes, he said quietly. Tell me. You continue preparing both POA documents exactly as Victoria expects. You deliver them on schedule. But inside the financial POA on page 34, subsection G, you embed a technical clause defining the effective date as contingent on written confirmation from the primary corporate secretary of Golden Grill Holdings. I paused. That position has been vacant since Board Resolution 2024-07, which I signed last month. The document will be perfectly formatted, properly notarized, and completely unenforceable. Walsh was silent for a long moment. And she'll have her attorneys review it, he said. She'll have them review the signature blocks and the asset schedules, I said. Not subsection G of the definition section. You know how she works, Donovan. You've known her longer than I have. A pause. What do I get? Full immunity from prosecution, I said. Documented cooperation. When this is over, I will personally confirm to the U.S. Attorney that your assistance was voluntary, complete, and decisive. I waited. You've been my attorney for 20 years. I don't want to destroy you. I want to give you the chance to be on the right side of this. The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds. Then Walsh said, page 34, subsection G. Correct. Documents will be ready by Friday. Thank you, Donovan. I ended the call and set the phone on the blanket. Below the window, the city was beginning its morning shift trucks, moving on the 610, the hospital parking structure, filling row by row the ordinary machinery of a Friday, starting up without any knowledge of what it contained. The trap had its teeth. Ray came in at 7:15 with Victoria already in the room. She had arrived early again, sixth consecutive day. I had stopped finding it remarkable and started finding it informative. Victoria did not do anything without purpose. Early arrivals meant she was monitoring something, probably the nursing handover notes which she had been requesting from the charge nurse each morning, under the authority of the hypoia form. She believed was still active. It was not still active. Ray had processed the revocation at midnight. She didn't know that yet. Good morning. Ray set his chart on the bed rail and ran through the standard checks: blood pressure, oxygen saturation, the monitor readout. His hands moved with the practiced economy of a man who had done this 10,000 times. Edward, I want to discuss your numbers from last night's draw. Victoria straightened in her chair. Ray turned to face us both. Platelet count is down to 18,000. Blast percentage in the marrow has climbed to 94%. He kept his voice measured clinical, giving away nothing. We're running out of time on the transplant window. Without a matched donor in the next 3 to 4 weeks, we shift to palliative management. The word palliative landed in the room like a stone. Victoria's hands remained folded in her lap, still, composed. I watched her from the corner of my eye and thought she has been waiting for exactly this update. Not dreading it, waiting for it. Is there any other avenue? She asked. Her concern was flawless. We're pursuing every option, Ray said. He looked at me. I'd like to run one additional compatibility panel, a long shot, but medically indicated. Results by Friday. Whatever you recommend, I said. Ray made a note in the chart. Then he looked at Victoria with the polite, impersonal expression he reserved for family members. Mrs. Hartwell, going forward per your husband's updated directive, all medical information is now confidential under full HICEA protection. Any updates on his condition will come directly through Edward. Victoria turned to look at me. I closed my eyes slowly as though the conversation had exhausted me. I don't understand, she said. Her voice had not changed, only the tempo half a beat slower than usual. It's standard patient privacy protocol, Ray said pleasantly. Edward exercised his right under 45 CFR, section 164.522 last night. The authorization form from day one has been formally revoked. He capped his pen. If you have questions about his care, he's the appropriate person to ask. A silence. Then Victoria said very quietly, "Of course." Ray nodded and left. I kept my eyes closed. I heard Victoria pick up her bag. I heard her stand. I heard her cross to the window 4 steps and stop. She stood there for perhaps 20 seconds. Then she said to the window, to the Houston skyline, to no one in particular, "You seem tired today, Edward. I'll let you rest." Her heels clicked to the door. The door closed. I opened my eyes. From this moment forward, every piece of information Victoria received about my condition would require Marcus to break federal law to obtain it. The clock was running. Claire called at 4 in the afternoon. I had been watching the secondary phone since 3, not with anxiety, but with the focused attention of someone waiting for a specific piece to arrive so the next move can be made. Preliminary HLA results, she said. No preamble. Maggie ran a panel in Washington this morning before she booked the flight. Dr. Cole has the numbers. I reached for the call button, then stopped. Tell me first. A pause. 8.9, Claire said. Preliminary, unconfirmed. The monitor beeped. I counted 2 full cycles. 8.9 out of 10. From a woman who had been wearing a piece of red thread on her wrist for 55 years, waiting for the right moment to walk through a door she had been standing outside of for a decade. She's coming, I said, not a question. She booked the flight 20 minutes after the results came through, Claire said. She lands at 6:50 a.m. And the IRS case? She filed a preliminary motion this morning before the panel, Claire said. Asset freeze takes effect Friday at 10 a.m. She said to tell you, a pause, the careful pause of someone relaying exact words. She said I file early. It's how I work. Something moved in my chest that had nothing to do with the leukemia. She'll want the full evidence package when she arrives, I said. The penthouse video, the Walsh recordings, everything Briggs has authorized for sharing. I'll have it ready, Claire said. Claire, I stopped. Yes. You've been managing 2 separate operations for 6 years, I said. Mine and hers, without either of us knowing about the other. A silence. Someone had to, she said simply. I looked at the orchids on the windowsill, white, cold, entirely unaware of what was arriving in 11 hours. Get some rest, I said. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. I don't rest before long days, Claire said. I prepare for them. She ended the call. I set the phone on the blanket and looked at the ceiling. 8.9, preliminary. By morning it would be confirmed. Walsh arrived at 2 in the afternoon on Thursday, the day before the board meeting, with Victoria beside him and the documents under his arm. I had been expecting them. I had arranged my face accordingly, the particular expression of a man who is present but only barely, whose attention drifts at the edges, whose grip on the sequence of events is loose enough to be managed by people with better intentions than his own. Victoria set her bag on the visitor's chair and smiled at me. Donovan has the paperwork we discussed, darling. Just some routine estate planning, nothing complicated. Of course, I said. Walsh laid 2 folders on the bedside tray. He opened the first medical power of attorney, 31 pages, and walked through the key provisions with the unhurried clarity of a man who has explained legal documents to tired people for 30 years. Treatment decisions, end-of-life directives, the standard language of incapacity planning. I signed where he indicated, slowly, without question. He opened the second folder. Financial and business power of attorney, 47 pages, tabbed, notarized, 2 independent witness signatures already in place. This one covers corporate decisions, asset management, and any transfers or restructuring required during your period of incapacity, Walsh said. It's comprehensive. Victoria would have full authority to act on Golden Grill's behalf. Victoria was watching me with the careful attention of someone monitoring a performance they have directed. I picked up the folder and began reading. Page 1, page 2, the asset schedule on page 8. I paused there, made a small sound of effort, turned the page. Page 15, the indemnification clause on page 22, which I read twice with the visible slowness of a man whose concentration is unreliable. Page 34, subsection G, definition of effective date and activation conditions. The language was immaculate. Walsh had embedded it with the precision of a surgeon, a single sentence grammatically consistent with everything around it, defining the instrument's effective date as contingent on written confirmation from the primary corporate secretary of Golden Grill Holdings, as designated by Board Resolution 2024-07, the position that resolution had eliminated. I read subsection G twice. Then I turned to page 35 and kept going. At page 47, I set the folder down and reached for the pen. That this is thorough, I said. Donovan is always thorough, Victoria said. I signed. Clean, deliberate, the same signature I had put on 35 years of contracts. Walsh collected both folders and returned them to his briefcase with the careful movements of a man who understood exactly what he was carrying and why. Get well soon, Edward, he said. Thank you, Donovan. Victoria leaned down and kissed my cheek. I'll be back this evening, she said. They left together. The door clicked shut. I looked at the ceiling. Page 34, subsection G. The document Victoria was carrying out of this room would never give her a single thing she wanted. The secondary phone rang at 10 p.m. Not a message, a call. Unknown number, Washington, D.C. area code. I had been waiting for it since Claire called me at 5 to say she's flying tonight. She'll call before she boards. I answered on the first ring. Edward Hartwell. A woman's voice. Clear, unhurried, with the particular quality of someone who had chosen every word before dialing. Yes, I said. This is Margaret. A pause. Your sister. The room was very quiet. The monitor beeped. I counted 3 cycles without speaking, not from hesitation, but because 60 years of building things had taught me that some moments deserve more space than the instinct to fill them. Maggie, I said finally. A breath on the other end. Small. Controlled. Claire told me everything, she said. The leukemia, Victoria, the FBI wiretap, Walsh, and the documents. Another pause. I've been building an IRS case against Golden Grill's offshore transfers for 14 months. I didn't know it connected to you until 3 weeks ago when Claire gave me the full picture. How much have you found, I said. $42 million across 43 transactions over 4 years, she said. Shell companies in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. The paper trail is deliberately complex, but not complex enough. A beat. Edward. She's been planning this since before your diagnosis. I looked at the orchids on the windowsill. White cold perfect. I know, I said. I filed a preliminary IRS motion this morning, Maggie said. Asset freeze takes effect Friday at 10 a.m. I wanted you to know before it hit her accounts. You filed already. I file early, she said. It's how I work. Something moved in my chest recognition, perhaps. The particular satisfaction of meeting someone whose instincts match your own. The HLA test, I said. Claire mentioned you ran a preliminary panel. In D.C. yesterday morning, she said. Preliminary results show high compatibility. I need a full panel with your samples to confirm Ray Cole can run it when I arrive. A pause. I'm at Dulles now, boarding in 40 minutes. You're coming tonight. I've been trying to come for 10 years, she said quietly. Tonight I'm actually doing it. I closed my hand around the edge of the blanket. Maggie, I said. Yes. I named the company Hartwell so you could find me. I stopped. I want you to know that. The silence that followed was different from the ones before, and not careful, not calculated. Just full. Claire told me, she said. Her voice had changed, still controlled, but only just. She told me that was why. Then you knew before you called. Yes, she said, but I needed to hear you say it. The answer was always yes, I said. From the first day, whatever you were afraid to ask, the answer was always yes. She didn't speak for a long moment. I'll be there by 7 a.m., she said finally. I'll be awake, I said. Marcus came into the hospital at 2:17 p.m. on a Tuesday. I know the exact time because Claire was watching from the third-floor corridor camera, feeding the timestamp to her laptop in the parking structure below. She sent me a message when he entered through the stairwell door. He's in. Gray jacket, baseball cap, low. She did not need to tell me what he was looking for. I had been in MRI for the past 40 minutes, a scheduled scan arranged by Ray 2 days earlier, its timing not coincidental. The procedure gave Marcus 8 minutes in room 412 without me in it. We had mapped the window carefully. Marcus had mapped it too, which told me he had access to my medical schedule through someone on the hospital administrative staff. I filed that detail for Quinn. He moved to the bedside table first. The Patek Philippe was where I had left it, face-up positioned at the angle most visible from the doorway, the RF transmitter inside its casing, broadcasting its small patient signal. Marcus produced a handheld detector from his jacket. Consumer grade, the kind available online, adequate for what he needed. He swept the windowsill, the television mount, Victoria's chair, the ventilation register above the bathroom door, then the bedside table. The detector responded to the watch. Marcus picked it up, turned it over, and opened the back casing with a tool he had brought specifically for this purpose. He located the microcircuit. He removed it. He reassembled the watch and returned it to the table at precisely the angle he had found it. He said to no one, "Stubborn old man." He did not look up when he said it. The camera mounted inside the doorframe, 40 degrees downward angle, 6-foot range, positioned by the same equipment technician who had installed the RF transmitter, recorded his hands, his face in 3/4 profile, and his exit at 2:24 p.m. 7 minutes total. Claire sent the footage to Briggs at 3 p.m. with a note. He took the bait. Camera got everything. I replied from the MRI recovery area, still in the hospital gown, reading her message on the secondary phone. What are the charges? Her answer came in 2 minutes precise as everything she did. Criminal trespass in a restricted medical facility. Tampering with personal property. Adding to the federal package now. I set the phone down. Marcus had found exactly what I had placed for him to find. He had disabled exactly what I had placed for him to disable. He had walked out of room 412, satisfied that he had neutralized the threat. The third button on my hospital gown had recorded every second of it. Maggie arrived at 6:52 a.m. I watched her on the lobby camera feed from my secondary phone. She came through the main entrance with a leather document case over one shoulder, and the particular forward lean of someone who had already decided where she was going before she walked through the door. Claire was waiting near the information desk. They saw each other from 20 feet away. Neither of them moved for a moment, just looked the way people look at someone they know well, in an unfamiliar context, recalibrating. Then Maggie said something I couldn't hear from the camera feed. Claire nodded, and Maggie crossed the remaining distance and put her hand on Claire's shoulder briefly. Not an embrace exactly, but something that carried the weight of one. I switched off the feed and put the phone face down on the blanket. I had known intellectually since the morning Claire had shown me the photograph and told me Maggie had sent her here, but knowing a thing and watching it exist in the same physical space are different experiences entirely. Seeing Maggie's hand on Claire's shoulder made it real in a way that 5 weeks of planning had not. The door opened at 7:04. Claire came in first and stood to the left of the doorway. Maggie followed. She was 55 years old, and she looked like someone who had earned every one of those years gray at the temples, fine lines at the corners of eyes that were the exact shade of gray-green I remembered from a February night in 1971. She wore the dark blazer from the newspaper photograph. On her left wrist, just below her cuff, was a thin strand of red thread faded nearly white with age. The knot was mine. She stopped 2 feet inside the door and looked at me. I looked at her. 30 seconds passed. Neither of us spoke. Claire looked at the window. Then Maggie crossed the room, sat in the chair beside the bed, and reached over and took my left hand, not the way Victoria took it with cool fingers and practiced warmth, but with both of hers, the way you hold something you were afraid you would never find. She looked at the thread on my wrist, the one I had tied for myself 6 months ago, when I had first allowed myself to believe she might be alive. Same knot, same color, brighter because it was newer. She didn't cry. Neither did I. "You look terrible," she said. "So I've been told," I said. Something shifted in her expression, the composure cracking just slightly at the edges, enough to show what was underneath it. "I stood outside your building," she said, 10 years ago, 45 minutes. "I know," I said. "Claire told me." "I should have come in." "Yes," I said, "you should have." I looked at her hands holding mine. "But you're here now." She nodded once. Then she opened her document case. "Tell me everything Victoria has done," she said, "from the beginning." We talked for 3 hours. Maggie opened her laptop on the bedside table and worked the way I imagined she worked in every federal case she had ever built, methodically. Without emotion, moving through evidence with the focused patience of someone who understood that the difference between a conviction and an acquittal was almost always a detail someone else had considered too small to matter. I gave her the penthouse video. She gave me the IRS, transfer records, 43 transactions, color-coded by date and destination, the kind of document that represented months of work made to look simple. I told her about Walsh and page 34. She told me about the Delaware shell company that had received 11 of Victoria's transfers and existed on paper as a catering supply company with no employees and no physical address. I told her about Agent Briggs and the wiretap authorization. She told me she had already spoken to Briggs at 5 a.m. from the airport. They had worked together on a federal fraud case in 2019 and had apparently a productive professional relationship built on mutual efficiency and minimal small talk. "He said you were either very smart or very reckless," she said. "He said the same thing to me." I said, "What did you tell him?" "That it could be both." She looked at me over the top of her laptop. "It can't be both. Smart means you've accounted for the variables. Reckless means you haven't." "Then call it aggressive calculation," I said. She considered this. "That's acceptable." At 9:15, Ray came in, stopped when he saw Maggie, and then composed himself with the speed of a man who had learned not to show surprise in front of patients. "Dr. Cole," Maggie said, "I'm Margaret Hartwell. I believe we have a HLA panel to run." Ray looked at me. I nodded. "Full compatibility panel," he said. "I'll have the kit here within the hour." While Ray was gone, Maggie closed her laptop and looked at me directly the first time since she had arrived that she had stopped working long enough to simply look. "Are you frightened?" she said. "Of the transplant? Of any of it?" I thought about the question honestly the way I had learned to think about difficult questions, without the instinct to perform confidence, without the habit of deflection. "No," I said. "I was frightened 3 weeks ago in the first night after the diagnosis before I had a plan." I looked at the window. "I'm not frightened of things I can affect. And the things you can't—" I looked at her. "I found you," I said. "After 50 years. If that was possible, I've stopped maintaining a list of things that aren't." Maggie was quiet for a moment. Then she opened her laptop again. "The IRS freeze order," she said. "I want to walk you through the exact sequence for Friday." Show me," I said. Ray returned at 10:15 with the HLA kit, and a man I had not seen before, mid-40s, dark jacket, the kind of unremarkable appearance that is itself a kind of professional credential. "Agent Briggs asked me to bring someone," Ray said. He gestured toward the man. "This is Assistant U.S. Attorney Gerald Quinn. He's handling the federal prosecution." Quinn shook my hand, then Maggie's. Ms. Hartwell, I've read your IRS filing. It's thorough? It's complete, Maggie said. There's a difference. Quinn almost smiled. He pulled a chair to the foot of the bed and opened a slim folder. I want to walk through the prosecution framework before Friday. 3 parallel tracks, IRS, FBI, and corporate. They need to activate in sequence or the defense finds gaps. Show me, I said. He laid a single page on the blanket, a timeline clean and spare. Track 1 IRS asset freeze, Friday 10 a.m. Maggie's order covers Victoria's personal accounts, the Delaware Shell, and 2 Cayman vehicles we've identified. $42 million frozen pending criminal investigation. He moved his finger down the page. Track 2 FBI arrests. Marcus and the lab technician are taken at the moment of the sample tampering. We need the act on camera to add the federal tampering charge to the conspiracy count. That happens between 1 and 2 a.m. Friday morning. Another movement. Track 3 the board meeting, 2 p.m. Friday. Walsh presents the financial POA. The hidden clause on page 34 is discovered by the corporate legal member independently. The POA is void. Victoria has no standing. All 3 tracks within 4 hours, I said. Correct, Quinn said. If anyone moves early, the others lose their evidentiary value. Victoria's defense will argue coordination. We need each track to appear independent. Maggie looked up from her laptop. The wiretap recordings from Thursday night Victoria, confirming the sample swap with Marcus. Those go to the jury as the connective tissue between all 3 tracks. Exactly, Quinn said. Ray had been running the HLA panel during this conversation, quiet, efficient, the needle in Maggie's arm, and the samples labeled and sealed with the chain of custody documentation that the NMDP protocol required. He capped the final vial and looked at me. Preliminary read in 4 hours, he said. Full confirmation by tomorrow morning. And the real transplant, I said. Wednesday night, he said, 12:30 a.m. or 2-level B2. Full team, full documentation, full NMDP filing. He paused. Friday's procedure is theater. Wednesday night is real. The room was quiet for a moment, the 4 of us holding the weight of what Wednesday night meant. Then Maggie closed her laptop, looked at Quinn, and said, Friday, all 3 tracks, simultaneous. Quinn nodded. Simultaneous. I looked at the window. 3 days. Then we're ready, I said. Victoria made her mistake at 3:17 p.m. on Thursday. The same Thursday, Walsh had delivered the documents at 9 a.m. The same Thursday, the board had convened and left her empty-handed at 2 p.m. The day was not finished with her yet. She made it in the family waiting area, on the 12th floor, 20 feet from the nurse's station, 11 feet from the nearest FBI wire tap receiver, in full hearing of a conversation she believed was private. Because Marcus was standing close and speaking quietly, and she had always confused proximity with safety. I wasn't there. I heard it later from Briggs, who sent the transcript at 4 p.m., with a single line of annotation. This is your conspiracy to commit murder count, clean and complete. Marcus had asked about the timeline. The transcript recorded Victoria's response in full. The board meeting is Friday at 2, she said. Walsh confirms the POA is filed and executable. By the time they convene, it's done. And the other matter, Marcus said. The night shift technician confirmed. 1 a.m. Friday, he accesses the sample storage on level 3 and makes the substitution. The container goes into the OR Friday morning, labeled as the donor sample. Her voice was low and entirely steady. Within 48 hours of infusion, it presents as acute graft rejection, indistinguishable from natural complication. Bellamy will sign the death certificate, sexerent. Bellamy will sign whatever I tell him to sign. I set the transcript down. Victoria, Marcus said. If anything goes wrong, nothing will go wrong, she said. Edward is already failing. We're simply accelerating a process that has its own momentum. Another pause. Stop second-guessing. You weren't useful to me when you second-guessed things before, and you're not useful to me now. Marcus said nothing after that. Briggs called Maggie at 3:40. I was in the room when she answered, sitting in the chair beside my bed, with her laptop open, cross-referencing the IRS freeze order with Quinn's prosecution timeline. She'd listened for 90 seconds without speaking. Then, first-degree murder conspiracy, confirmed on wiretap. A pause. And Bellamy. Another pause. Get a warrant for Bellamy tonight. Separate charge conspiracy and falsification of medical records. She looked at me across the room. Do we have enough to move now? Briggs spoke, she listened. Hold, she said. We hold until Friday, all 3 tracks. She ended the call. I looked at her. She confirmed everything, Maggie said. The sample substitution, the timeline, Bellamy. She set the phone on the table. Briggs wants to arrest tonight. He has enough. We hold, I said. I told him that. She looked at me steadily. Are you certain? Because holding means Wednesday night's transplant has to be completely secured. If anything reaches that OR, that shouldn't. The Ray has the real sample in a separate secured unit, I said. The container on level 3 is saline. Marcus substitutes saline with poison. FBI captures it on camera. That's the tampering charge. Maggie was quiet for a moment. She called you a process with its own momentum, she said. And I said. How does that feel? I looked at the orchids in the window. Like confirmation. I said that I made the right decision 3 weeks ago. Ray's office at 11 p.m. was a different room than it was during the day. The overhead lights were off, just the desk lamp, casting a narrow cone of yellow light across the surface where Ray had spread the transplant documentation. Outside the window, the hospital's rooftop HVAC units ran their steady nighttime rhythm. The corridor beyond the door was quiet. I came in a wheelchair. Maggie walked beside me. Claire stayed in the hallway. Ray stood at the desk, hands flat on the documentation, and looked at us both with the expression of a man who had made his decision and was now simply executing it. Wednesday night, he said, 12:30 a.m. or 2-level B2. He walked us through it without preamble. The donor sample Maggie's cells collected in a separate stem cell harvest procedure, Tuesday afternoon under Ray's direct supervision, while the final HLA confirmation results were still being processed, was already in secured cryopreservation under chain of custody documentation filed with the NMDP. Ray had compressed both procedures into the same 12-hour window deliberately to close the timeline before Friday. Every step of the harvest had been logged, witnessed, and time-stamped. The transplant authorization was signed, the recipient consent, documented, the surgical team, briefed under the protected identity protocol that the federal warrant authorized. The procedure itself is standard, Ray said. 5 to 6 hours, full team. I've done this procedure 240 times. He looked at me. Your profile is good, Edward. The preliminary read was 9.4. Full confirmation this morning was 9.8. At 9.8, I said. Out of 10, he said. I've seen 3 scores that high in 20 years of practice. He paused. The graft will take. I looked at Maggie. She was looking at the documentation on Ray's desk with the careful attention she gave everything, reading the chain of custody form, checking the NMDP filing number, verifying the harvest timestamp against the storage log. The level 3 container, she said without looking up. The one Marcus will access Friday morning. Saline solution, Ray said. Properly labeled, properly stored, indistinguishable from a viable donor sample without laboratory analysis. He paused. Whatever Marcus substitutes into that container FBI captures on camera, the real sample never enters that room. And Friday's OR procedure, I said. Theater, Ray said. You'll be prepped, anesthetized, monitored. Everything visible from the observation window will be consistent with a bone marrow transplant procedure. What will not be happening is a bone marrow transplant because that will have already happened Wednesday night. He looked at me steadily. When you wake up Friday morning, the graft will be 36 hours old. The room was quiet. Maggie set down the chain of custody form and looked at her brother at me with an expression I had no name for and did not try to name. 9.8, she said quietly. Nearly perfect, Ray said. She nodded once, then she looked at me and said, I spent 50 years looking for you. I know, I said. Don't make Wednesday night the last thing I find. I looked at her. At the red thread on her wrist, pale with age, the knot still tight. I won't, I said. Walsh delivered the documents at 9 a.m. on Friday. He came alone, no assistant, no second attorney, which told me he had made a calculation about witnesses that I respected. He set the briefcase on Victoria's kitchen table in the River Oaks house and opened it without ceremony. Victoria was already seated. She had been waiting since 8:30. I knew this because the wiretap in her kitchen, authorized under the same federal warrant that covered the hospital, had logged her pacing for 40 minutes before Walsh rang the doorbell. I listened to the recording at noon from my hospital bed. Both instruments, Walsh said. He laid the folders side by side. medical POA and financial and business POA. Fully executed, notarized, 2 independent witnesses. Everything is in order. Victoria picked up the financial POA, immediately the one that mattered to her, the one with 47 pages, and the asset schedule and the corporate authority provisions. She turned to the signature block. She checked the notary stamp. She verified the witness signatures. She did not turn to page 34. This is clean, she said. Completely, Walsh said. She closed the folder, set it on the table with the particular care of someone handling something valuable. Then she opened her laptop, navigated to her banking interface, and transferred $200,000 to Walsh's firm account. For your discretion, she said. Walsh looked at the transfer confirmation on her screen. Thank you, Victoria. Don't thank me, she said. Just make sure this holds up on Friday. It will hold up, Walsh said. He was correct. It would hold up in exactly the way he and I had designed it to hold up, which was to say it would stand perfectly until the moment someone with corporate legal expertise turned to page 34, at which point it would collapse with the quiet completeness of a structure built on a foundation that was never there. Walsh closed his briefcase and stood. One more thing, Victoria said. She was still looking at the folder. When the board meeting convenes Friday, I want you present, in the room. Of course, Walsh said. I want someone there who understands the documents, she said. Who can explain them if questions arise? I'll be there, Walsh said. He left at 9:22. The wiretap logged Victoria, making 2 calls immediately after one, to Marcus 1, to a number Briggs identified as Bellamy's private line. At 9:45, Walsh sent me a message on the secondary phone. Delivered, page 34 intact. She checked the signature block and the notary stamp, nothing else. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Maggie with a single edition wire transfer of $200,000 logged by FBI at 9:09 a.m. Wire fraud count confirmed. Maggie responded in 4 minutes. IRS freeze order updated to include the Walsh transfer. That's now 43 transactions plus 1. She just handed us the final nail. I set the phone down. Victoria was carrying 47 pages of carefully constructed nothing under her arm, and she had paid $200,000 for the privilege. The board meeting was 5 hours away. The board meeting began at 2 p.m. I watched it from my hospital bed on a feed Claire had arranged through the building's security system, a single camera in the upper corner of the 40th floor conference room. The image was sharp enough to read expressions. That was all I needed. 7 board members, Walsh at the far end, Victoria at the head of the table, the financial POA folder in front of her, composed in the way she was always composed when she believed the outcome was already determined. Richard Vance called the meeting to order. Richard was 61, a 20-year board member, and the person I had called on day 4 of my hospitalization at 11 p.m. He had listened without interrupting, asked 4 precise questions, and said, "Tell me what you need." I had told him. He had done it convening this meeting through proper corporate procedure, 5 days' notice, full documentation, every requirement of the company bylaws satisfied. Item 3, Richard said. Mrs. Hartwell has requested time to present documentation regarding temporary executive authority during the chairman's medical leave. Victoria presented calmly, efficiently, with the rehearsed fluency of someone who had prepared this moment carefully. The medical POA, the financial POA, Walsh's written confirmation, Dr. Bellamy's competency assessment claiming cognitive decline sufficient to warrant surrogate decision-making. The board listened. Then Sandra Okafor, the board's legal affairs member, 26 years in corporate law, picked up the financial POA and began reading. Not the signature block, not the asset schedule, from page 1. The room was quiet while she read. Victoria's hands remained flat on the table. Walsh looked at the window. Sandra turned to page 34. She read subsection G twice. I watched her expression change, a slight narrowing around the eyes, the look of a lawyer who has found something that should not be there. "Donovan," she said, "this effective date clause requires written confirmation from the primary corporate secretary." Walsh turned from the window. "Yes. Board Resolution 2024-07 eliminated that position 8 months ago." She set the folder down. "There is no one to provide the confirmation. This instrument is unenforceable in its current form." Walsh looked at the folder, then at Sandra. then at Victoria, and his expression in that moment was a masterpiece of professional mortification. That clause was carried over from the standard template. I should have caught the conflict with a 2024 resolution. He paused. Sandra, I apologize. This is my error. Victoria did not move. What does this mean? She said. Corporate authority remains with the chairman, Sandra said. The financial POA has no legal effect. I watched Victoria's face on the feed. The composure held, but beneath it something had shifted permanently. I turned off the screen. Round 1, Edward. The real transplant happened at 12:30 a.m. on Wednesday. Ray came for me at midnight, just him and one orderly named Curtis, a quiet man who had worked Houston Methodist night shift for 19 years, and who Ray trusted with difficult things. I transferred from the wheelchair to the gurney in the corridor outside, room 412, and we moved through the hospital's nighttime silence toward the service elevator. Level B2, or 2. The room was fully lit when we arrived, the aggressive brightness of a surgical suite that makes everything outside it feel like a different world. The team was already positioned anesthesiologists, 2 surgical nurses, a transplant specialist Ray had brought from MD Anderson under the Federal Protected Identity Protocol. They worked with the focused efficiency of people who had been briefed thoroughly and had no remaining questions. Maggie was in the anteroom in a surgical gown. She looked up when I came through the door. How are you feeling? She said. Ready, I said. Good. She stood. I'll be here when you wake up. Ray appeared at my shoulder. We need to move Edward. I looked at Maggie at the red thread on her wrist, visible below the surgical gown's cuff. She had not taken it off. I thought about the night I had tied it 55 years ago, in a room that smelled of floor wax and salt air, around a wrist smaller than my 5-year-old hand. Maggie, I said. It's yes. When this is over, all of it, I want to go back to Galveston. She looked at me steadily. To where St. Augustine was... The building is gone, I said. But the address is still there. She nodded once. We'll go, together. Ray touched my arm. I lay back and let them wheel me into the surgical suite. The anesthesiologist introduced himself. I appreciated the formality. He explained the sequence clearly. I told him I had 30 years of breath control training. He said that was interesting and administered the anesthetic anyway, which was the correct professional decision. The last thing I registered before the room went away was the overhead surgical light, a wide, flat circle of white that left no shadows anywhere. I woke at 6:40 a.m. The pain was different from the leukemia's burning, cleaner, rawer. The honest ache of a body that has been opened and repaired and is now integrating something new into itself. Maggie was in the chair beside the gurney. Her laptop was open, but she wasn't looking at it. She was looking at me. 9.8, I said. My voice came out rough. You're on 9.8, she confirmed. Ray says the initial indicators are good. I looked at the recovery room ceiling. Friday, I said. Yeah, 36 hours, she said quietly. Rest now. Friday takes care of itself. Victoria called Marcus at 8 p.m. on Wednesday. I know the exact time because Briggs sent me the transcript at 8:45 with a note she's accelerating. Read this carefully. I read it carefully. She had called from her car. The wiretap covered her personal vehicle under the same federal warrant. Marcus answered on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting. The board meeting failed, she said. No preamble. I heard, Marcus said. Walsh made an error, she said. It doesn't matter. The POA is fixable. Sandra said a corrected version with the right corporate structure could be presented at an emergency board session within 10 days. A pause. We don't have 10 days. Friday, Marcus said. Friday, she confirmed. The OR procedure is scheduled for 9 a.m. The sample substitution happens at 1 a.m. You confirmed the technician. Ort, imbarstiks das beidard. Confirmed, Marcus said. He has access to level 3 storage. The substitution takes 4 minutes. Ann Bellamy. Ready, Marcus said. He'll certify the death as acute graft rejection. Natural complication, no investigation triggered. A silence. Then Victoria said something that I read 3 times before I set the transcript down. I've been patient for 4 years, Marcus. I married a man who built everything from nothing and kept every piece of it locked inside his own hands. 4 years of planning. I will not lose this to a clause on page 34. Marcus said, you won't. Make sure of it, she said, and she ended the call. I lay in the recovery room, the graft 30 hours old, the ache present and manageable, and I read the transcript one final time. 4 years of planning, not opportunism, not a decision made after the diagnosis. 4 years. She had been building this while we were still having dinner together, while she was still wearing the perfume I bought her, while I was still telling myself that the distance I felt was something marriages move through naturally. I had spent 35 years reading people across negotiating tables. I had missed this one completely. I picked up the secondary phone and called Maggie. She answered immediately. "I read it," she said. "Briggs sent it to me too." "Well, she confirmed everything on record," I said. "Sample substitution Bellamy the timeline." "The wiretap recording is clean," Maggie said. "Quinn says it's the clearest conspiracy confirmation he's seen in 12 years of federal prosecution." A pause. "Briggs wants to move tonight. He has enough, Edward. More than enough." "No," I said. "We hold until Friday. Blunt." "I know," she said. "I already told him." A beat. "Are you certain?" I looked at the recovery room ceiling. "She said 4 years," I said. "I want every one of those 4 years on the public record before anyone puts handcuffs on her." Maggie was quiet for a moment. "Friday," she said. "Friday," I said. Maggie stayed until midnight. After the calls were made and the transcripts reviewed and the Friday timeline confirmed with Briggs and Quinn, she closed her laptop and sat in the chair beside my recovery bed, and we talked about nothing important for the first time since she had arrived in Houston. She told me about her apartment in Washington, a 1-bedroom in Georgetown, books on every surface, a window that looked out onto a courtyard where someone had planted a fig tree that had no business surviving a DC winter, but did so anyway every year, out of what she described as pure stubbornness. "Sounds familiar," I said. She looked at me. "The tree or the apartment?" "The stubbornness." She smiled, the first full smile I had seen from her, unguarded, lasting perhaps 3 seconds before her composure reasserted itself. It was enough. It was more than enough. "Tell me about Golden Grill," she said. "The beginning, not the press version." So I told her. The first location, a converted diner in Beaumont, Texas, 1989. 12 tables a fryer that needed replacing every 4 months, a sign I had painted myself because I couldn't afford a professional. I had worked the counter 6 days a week for 2 years before I could afford a second employee. The name Hartwell on the sign had been deliberate from the first day, not pride exactly, but intention, a marker, a fixed point. "I thought about changing it," I said. "In the early years, when the name felt like a liability, an orphan's name, a nobody's name, a partner suggested something more marketable." I paused. "I told him the name wasn't negotiable." Maggie looked at her wrist, at the red thread. "I saw the first Golden Grill sign in 2003, she said quietly. "I was driving through Beaumont on a federal case. I saw the name on the highway billboard, and I pulled over." She stopped. "I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. "Did you go in?" I said. "No," she said. "I wasn't ready." "What did you do?" "I took a photograph," she said. "Of the sign. I still have it." She looked at me. "I have photographs of 11 Golden Grill locations. Every time I passed one on a case, I stopped." I looked at the ceiling. 11 locations. 11 times she had pulled over on the side of a highway or into a parking lot and sat with the evidence that I existed and had not gone away. "As Maggie," I said. "I know," she said. "I should have come sooner. I've already accepted that." "That's not what I was going to say." She looked at me. "I was going to say 11 locations. You should have come in at least once." She laughed, the same surprise brief sound I had heard on the phone from Dulles. It was the best sound I had encountered in 60 years. "Claire came to me Thursday morning at 7. She brought coffee, 2 cups paper from the hospital cafeteria and set them on the bedside table without being asked. She had been doing this every morning for 6 years. I had accepted it every morning for 6 years without fully registering what it represented. This morning I registered it. "Sit down, Claire," I said. She looked at me, a brief assessment the way she assessed everything. Then she sat. "How long did you know?" I said. "Before I found the photograph." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "From the first day I came to work for you," she said. "Maggie briefed me completely before I applied for the position. Your history, Golden Grill, the St. Augustine records, everything she had spent 2 years compiling." She paused. "She showed me the photograph of the 2 of you, the one from the children's home records." "And you came anyway," I said, "knowing what you were walking into." "She asked me to," Claire said simply. "She said you were alone and didn't know it. She wanted someone there who understood why that mattered. I looked at her 32 years old, sitting in a hospital chair with a paper coffee cup, 6 years of mornings between us. 5 years, I said. You said nothing. Maggie said to wait for the right moment. She looked at her coffee. I thought the right moment would be obvious when it arrived. She was correct. What was she afraid of? I said. Specifically, not the general answer. Claire was quiet for a moment. That you had built your life into something so complete that adding a sister to it would feel like disruption rather than addition. She paused. She said her exact words that she didn't want to be the person who showed up at the end and claimed a relationship she hadn't earned. I thought about that. She found me in a federal filing, I said. She ran a 2-year investigation to confirm my identity. She sent you here for 5 years to watch over me. She flew from Washington at midnight, the moment I needed her. I set my coffee down. How is that not earning it? Claire looked up. I asked her the same thing, she said. Last year, she said earning it and feeling like you've earned it are 2 different things. The room was quiet for a moment. She was right about that too, I said. Claire nodded. She stood, straightened her jacket, and picked up her laptop bag with the efficient movements of someone returning to the work that needed doing. At the door she stopped. Mr. Hartwell, she said without turning. For what it's worth, she was right about you too. Everything she told me before I came. A pause. You were worth watching over. She left before I could respond. I looked at the coffee she had brought me. 6 years of mornings. I had been less alone than I knew. Maggie filed the formal IRS motion at 2 p.m. on Thursday. She called me from the federal building downtown. I could hear the particular acoustic quality of a government corridor in the background, hard floors and high ceilings voices at a distance. It's done, she said. Freeze order number IRS-2025-HOU-0147. Effective Friday, 10 a.m. 3 personal accounts, the Delaware Shell, 2 Cayman vehicles. A pause. $42 million frozen pending criminal investigation. Bellamy, I said. Quinn filed a separate warrant for Bellamy this morning. Conspiracy and falsification of medical records. He'll be picked up Friday afternoon after the main arrests, so he can't warn Victoria. Good, I said. And the wire transfer to Walsh, the $200,000. Added to the freeze order this morning, she said. That transaction alone constitutes wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343. It crossed state lines through a federally regulated banking system. A pause. She handed us that one herself. I heard her moving footsteps, a door opening, the background noise changing to something quieter. Maggie, I said. How solid is the case? Airtight, she said, without hesitation, without qualification. I have built federal cases for 22 years. I have never walked into a prosecution with this volume of clean evidence. Another pause. The wiretap recordings alone would convict her. The video from the penthouse meeting, the Walsh documents, the sample tampering footage from Friday morning, each piece independently would be sufficient. Together, they are, she stopped, chose her word, overwhelming. And Marcus's plea, Quinn expects him to approach by Saturday at the latest, she said. Once he's arrested and the charges are read to him, he'll calculate the math within 24 hours. 40 years, federal versus cooperation. He's not loyal to Victoria, he never was. He's been recording her for his own protection since the beginning. I know, I said. That's why I let him keep recording. A brief silence. You knew about his camera in the penthouse, she said. I suspected, I said. A man like Marcus doesn't enter a conspiracy of this scale without an exit strategy. His exit strategy was always the same thing Victoria's, was documentation of the other person's culpability. So you let them record each other, Maggie said slowly. And I recorded both of them, I said, through the FBI wiretap that neither of them knew existed. Another silence, longer this time. Edward, she said. Yes. I want you to know something. Her voice shifted, still precise, but underneath the precision, something unguarded. I spent 22 years building cases against people who thought they were untouchable. I have never once in all that time felt what I feel about this particular case. What do you feel? I said. And satisfied, she said. Completely and entirely satisfied. I looked at the orchids on the windowsill. Tomorrow, they would be the last thing Victoria ever chose for this room. Tomorrow, I said, 10 a.m. 10 a.m., she confirmed. Marcus arrived at level 3 storage at 1:17 a.m. on Friday. I know the exact time because Briggs sent me the FBI camera footage at 9 a.m. 4 angles, full color timestamp, in the lower right corner of each frame. I watched it twice on the secondary phone, while Maggie sat in the chair beside me, reviewing Quinn's final prosecution brief. Marcus came with the lab technician, a man named Gerald Toft, 34 night shift, who had been accepting monthly deposits from an account registered to a shell company Victoria controlled since the previous spring. Toft used his access card on the storage room door. Marcus followed him in. They moved directly to the sample refrigeration unit, no hesitation, no searching. Toft had clearly memorized the location in advance. He opened the unit, located the container labeled Hartwell E, donor, sample, NMMDP chain of custody, and removed it. Marcus opened the bag he was carrying and produced a second container, identical labeling, identical dimensions. Inside it was the immunosuppressant solution that Bellamy had prepared, concentrated enough according to the toxicology report Quinn had obtained from an independent expert to cause acute systemic failure within 48 hours of infusion. Presented as graft rejection in a leukemia patient, it would require a detailed forensic investigation to distinguish from natural complication. Toft made the substitution, 38 seconds. He replaced the original container, the one containing saline, not Maggie's cells, because Ray had moved the real sample to the secured unit on level 6 4 days earlier with Marcus's container. He closed the refrigeration unit. Marcus put the original container in his bag. They were in the room for 4 minutes and 11 seconds total. When they left, 4 FBI agents were waiting in the corridor. I watched the arrest on the footage, clean, fast, professional. Briggs had positioned his team at both ends of the hallway. Marcus turned right out of the storage room and stopped when he saw the agents. He looked left. 2 more agents there. He set the bag down on the floor. He did not run. Whatever else Marcus Reeves was, he was not a man who ran when the mathematics had already resolved against him. Toft was arrested simultaneously. Both men were read their rights in the corridor outside the storage room, on camera with the container of immunosuppressant solution sitting on the floor between them as Exhibit A of a federal tampering charge. I set the phone down. Maggie looked up from the prosecution brief. Briggs confirmed. "And for full footage," I said. "Clean arrest, both in custody." She nodded once and returned to her reading. I looked at the ceiling. The graft was 44 hours old. The transplant that Marcus believed he had just prevented had happened 2 days ago in a room he never knew existed. He had substituted saline with poison. He had handed federal agents the final charge on his own indictment. 3 hours until 10 a.m. I wrote the letters at 3 a.m. The hospital was at its quietest, the particular stillness of an institution between 2 and 4 in the morning, when the night shift has found its rhythm and the day shift is still hours away. I had asked Claire to leave a notepad and pen on the bedside table before she went home. She had left them without asking why. I wrote 3 letters by hand. My handwriting was worse than usual. The graft and the medication made my fingers slightly unreliable, but legible. I had always believed that handwritten letters carried a weight that typed documents couldn't replicate. 35 years of contracts had not changed that belief. The first letter was for Claire, 6 years of mornings. I looked past you for most of them, not because you weren't visible, but because I had trained myself to look past people who were consistent. Consistency, I told myself, was infrastructure. I was wrong. You were not infrastructure. You were the steadiest thing in a room full of things designed to move. I am sorry it took a hospital bed for me to see the difference. Thank you for staying anyway. The second letter was for Maggie. You gave me bone marrow. You gave me 55 years of red thread. You gave me a sister who showed up with a federal case file and a laptop, and the particular efficiency of someone who had been waiting to be useful for a very long time. I don't have language adequate to the thing you gave me, so I'll say only this: the answer was always yes. It always will be. The third letter took longest. Not because I had more to say to Victoria, I had less, but because the things I had less to say required more precision than the things I had more to say. I loved you. That is not a performance or a strategy or a component of anything I planned in room 412. It is simply true, and I wanted you to have it in writing because I think you stopped believing it somewhere in the 4 years you were planning this, and I want the record to be accurate. I loved you. You chose something else. I understand the choosing, if not the choice. I grew up with nothing, and I know what the fear of returning to nothing can do to a person's decisions. I hope the years ahead give you something real to hold on to. I mean that without irony. Edward, I sealed all 3 letters and envelopes Claire had left with the notepad. Then I turned off the bedside lamp and lay in the dark. The graft was 46 hours old. Marcus was in federal custody. The IRS freeze order would activate in 7 hours. The board meeting was 11 hours away. I had done everything I could do from a hospital bed. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 6 weeks, I did not need to count anything. Friday arrived the way important days always do, without announcement, indistinguishable from any other morning until you remember what it contains. Ray had moved me back to room 412 by Thursday evening. The graft was 36 hours old. To anyone checking the ward record, I had never left. I was awake at 5:30. The graft was 48 hours old, and the ache had shifted less sharp, more diffuse, the feeling of something settling into place rather than something being done to you. Ray had said that was a good sign. I chose to believe him. Claire arrived at 6 with coffee and the secondary phone fully charged. She set both on the bedside table and looked at me with the careful assessment she had been giving me every morning for 6 years, which I now understood differently than I had yesterday. "How are you feeling?" she said. "Ready," I said. The same word I had given Maggie before the transplant. I had discovered the only accurate answer to that question when the alternative was not being ready, and that was not an option. "Maggie is downstairs," Claire said. "She's been here since 5. She's in the cafeteria working." "Of course she is," I said. At 7:15, Ray came in for morning rounds, real rounds today, not theater. He checked the graft indicators, reviewed the overnight monitoring data, and told me in a low voice that everything was tracking correctly. Then he raised his voice to its normal professional register for the benefit of the nursing notes. "Edward, I want to discuss the procedure scheduled for 9 a.m. The OR team will come for you at 8:30. I understand," I said. "Your wife has requested to be present for the pre-procedure preparation," he said. His eyes held mine for exactly 1 second. "I've approved family access to the pre-op area." That's fine," I said. Victoria arrived at 8. She came in wearing the deep blue blouse, the one I had once told her, made her look composed. She had remembered that too, the way she remembered everything useful. She carried nothing. No flowers today. No card. She sat in the chair beside the bed and took my hand. I let her. "How are you feeling?" she said. The same words as Claire, an entirely different question. "Frightened," I said. I let the words sit between us. It was not entirely untrue. I was frightened of a great many things, none of which were the ones she assumed. "You're gonna be fine," she said. Then she leaned close enough that the French perfume reached me before her voice did, and something underneath the warmth slipped. "Look at yourself, Edward, an old lion rotting on a mountain of money. Don't make me stare at this pathetic version of you for another second." She pulled back as quickly as she had leaned in, and the smile returned, practiced and seamless. "Everything is going to work out." I looked at her, really looked the way I hadn't allowed myself to look in weeks. 48 years old, still beautiful in the way she had always been beautiful, the particular architecture of a face that had learned early how to arrange itself for maximum effect. I had loved that face. That was still true. "Thank you for being here," I said. She squeezed my hand. Where else would I be? The orderly arrived at 8:30 with the wheelchair. The surgical team waiting on level 5 had been briefed by Ray the night before no procedure would take place. Edward would be brought to pre-op vitals monitored and held under light sedation for appearance only. Every member of that team had signed a federal witness protection acknowledgement before Ray told them anything. I looked at Victoria one last time as they positioned it beside the bed. She was watching me with the composed attention of a woman monitoring the final moments of a very long plan. I gave her nothing to read. "I'll see you after," I said. She nodded. "I'll be right here." The wheelchair moved toward the door. Behind me, I heard her pick up her phone. The wiretap was running. Marcus was arrested at 9:03 a.m. He had come to the hospital at 8:45, not to the storage room, which he believed he had already handled at 1 a.m., but to the pre-surgical staging area on level 5. His plan, as Briggs later confirmed from the wiretap recording made in his car en route, was to verify that the substituted container had been transferred from storage to the OR preparation station, a final confirmation. The last step of a 4-year plan reduced to a visual check. He used Toph's access card. Toft was already in federal custody, but Marcus didn't know that yet. The card still worked because Briggs had specifically instructed the hospital's security team to leave it active. Marcus swiped through the staging area door at 9:01. The container was on the preparation station exactly where it should have been labeled, correctly positioned, correctly indistinguishable from a legitimate donor sample to anyone who was not a laboratory specialist with the right testing equipment. He looked at it for perhaps 5 seconds. Then he turned to leave. 4 agents stepped out from the supply alcove to his left. "That's Marcus Reeves," Briggs said. "Federal agents, do not move." I watched the footage later, the moment Marcus registered what was happening. It took approximately 2 seconds. His eyes moved from Briggs to the 3 agents flanking him, to the door behind him, where 2 more agents were now visible. His hand, which had been reaching toward his jacket pocket, stopped moving. He was whatever else he was, a man who understood mathematics. He raised both hands. Briggs read the charges clearly on camera in the fully lit staging area of a federally regulated medical facility. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, tampering with biological specimens with intent to cause death. 18 U.S.C. Section 1365, criminal trespass in a restricted medical facility, criminal HIP BAA violation, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit corporate fraud. 6 federal charges, combined sentencing exposure 40-plus years. Marcus said nothing during the reading. He looked at the floor with the particular stillness of a man running internal calculations at speed. When Briggs finished, Marcus looked up. "I want to speak to a prosecutor," he said. "Not a defense attorney, a prosecutor. I have something to offer." Briggs looked at him for a moment. "You'll get that opportunity." They cuffed him and walked him out through the service corridor away from the main hospital traffic, away from cameras, away from Victoria, who was at that moment sitting in room 412, waiting for news from a surgical procedure that was not happening. At 9:07, my secondary phone buzzed. "Briggs Reeves in custody. Clean arrest. He's already asking for a deal." I read the message once, then I typed back, "Tell Quinn to let him wait 2 hours before he meets with him. Let him think about math." Briggs understood. I set the phone down. 1 down. Marcus waited 90 minutes. Quinn told me later that he had sat in the federal holding room with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on the wall, working through something internally with the focused concentration of a man doing arithmetic that kept coming out the same way no matter how many times he ran it. At 10:35, he asked for Quinn by name. Quinn entered the room, alone, no assistant, no recording equipment visible, though the room itself was wired under standard federal procedure. He set a single folder on the table and sat down. "You asked to see me," Quinn said. "What am I looking at?" Marcus said, realistically. 6 federal charges, Quinn said. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder carries life or a minimum of 30 years at the federal level. The tampering charge adds 15. The remaining 4 charges add another 25 in aggregate. He opened the folder. "You're looking at a realistic exposure of 40 to 50 years. You're 38. You would be released if everything went optimally for you at approximately age 88. Marcus looked at the folder. "What does cooperation look like?" he said. "Depends entirely on what you're offering," Quinn said. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket. The agents had checked it twice, found nothing, and removed a phone. He set it on the table between them. 47 minutes of video, he said. "Recorded in my penthouse. Victoria and Walsh and myself discussing the full plan, both POA instruments, the anticoagulant modification, the sample substitution, Bellamy's role." He paused. Her voice, her words, her instructions. Not summaries, not my account of events. Her actual voice giving actual orders. Quinn looked at the phone. "Why did you record it?" he said. "Because I'm not stupid," Marcus said. "Victoria needed me to be her instrument. Instruments get discarded when the job is done. I wanted insurance." He looked at Quinn steadily. "She would have given me to you eventually. I decided to give myself to you first on my own terms." Quinn picked up the phone. He reviewed the first 4 minutes of the footage enough to confirm content, not enough to suggest he was eager. He set it back down. "Full cooperation," he said. "Complete testimony. Every communication, every meeting, every instruction Victoria gave you. Written and verbal, grand jury and trial." He paused. "In exchange, the first-degree murder conspiracy charge is reduced to accessory to attempted murder. Sentencing recommendation of 8 to 12 years under federal guidelines. Possibility of parole consideration at 6. Marcus looked at the table. 8 years, he said. Against 50, Quinn said. You do the math. A silence. I've been doing the math since 9 a.m., Marcus said. He pushed the phone across the table. You have a deal. At 11:15, Maggie called me. Marcus took the plea, she said. Quinn has the video. I closed my eyes. Is it enough? I said. It was always enough, she said. Now it's overwhelming. Before I show you the moment, Victoria finally came face to face with everything she never saw coming. Comment I'm here below. I want to know who stayed for this part. Quick note, some details in this story are fictional, shaped for narrative purposes. If you'd rather step away now, this is your moment, otherwise stay close. What happens next changes everything. Briggs came in at 10:35 with 2 agents. He crossed the room, without hurry, the measured pace of a man who has arrived at the conclusion of something and intends to handle it with the professionalism the moment requires. He acknowledged me with a brief nod. He acknowledged Maggie. He looked at Victoria. Victoria Hartwell, he said. I'm placing you under arrest. He read the charges clearly, and without inflection, the way federal agents read charges not for drama, but for legal precision, because every word spoken in this moment was part of the record. Conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, corporate fraud, document forgery, wire fraud under 18 U.S.C. Section 1343, criminal HIP AA violation, embezzlement of corporate assets. 6 charges. The combined federal sentencing recommendation, as Quinn had calculated it, was 20 to 25 years. Victoria stood still throughout the reading. Her hands were at her sides. Her posture remained what it had always been, composed upright, the bearing of a woman who had decided long ago that how she appeared was something she could always control, even when everything else was gone. When Briggs finished, she extended her wrists. One of the agents stepped forward with the handcuffs. The sound they made closing was very small in the quiet room. Briggs touched her arm not unkindly and moved her toward the door. The 2 agents followed. At the threshold, Victoria stopped. She turned and looked at me across the room. I was standing beside the window, one hand on the sill, the Houston skyline, visible behind me in the flat Friday light. She looked at me for a long moment. You won, she said. Her voice was low, not bitter, simply accurate. The statement of a woman who respected the outcome even if she could not accept it. I looked at her. There were things I could have said. I had written some of them in a letter at 3 a.m. and sealed them in an envelope that was sitting in the drawer of the bedside table. But this was not the moment for those things. This moment belonged to the record, and the record did not need anything from me. I didn't want to win, I said. I wanted to survive. She looked at me for one more second, then she turned and walked through the door. I listened to the sound of her heels on the corridor tile, triple tap, paused the rhythm I had memorized in the first year of our marriage until the elevator took it away. The room was very quiet. Maggie came and stood beside me at the window. Claire stood near the door. Ray appeared in the doorway, a moment later read the room, and stayed where he was. It's done, Maggie said. I looked at the orchids on the windowsill. White, cold, perfect. Yes, I said, it's done. The lobby of Houston Methodist at 10 a.m. was the particular controlled chaos of a Friday morning, visitors arriving, staff, changing shifts, the information, desk managing 3 conversations simultaneously. Victoria was not in the lobby. She was in room 412, waiting for news from an OR that contained no surgery, monitoring a procedure that had already happened 48 hours ago, in a room she didn't know existed. The wiretap had logged her making 2 calls in the past hour. One to Marcus, which went unanswered, one to a number, Briggs identified as Bellamy's office line, which also went unanswered. I watched her on the room camera from the pre-op area where I had been taken for appearance's sake. She was sitting in the chair beside my empty bed phone in her lap, her composure beginning to show the first hairline fractures of a woman whose plan is not returning her calls. At 10:04, Maggie walked into the lobby. She wore the gray blazer, the IRS lanyard, the leather document case. She crossed directly to the elevator and took it to the 12th floor. She knocked on room 412 at 10:09. Victoria looked up, a stranger in a government lanyard. Her expression reorganized itself into polite inquiry. Mrs. Hartwell, Maggie said. She stepped inside and closed the door. I'm Margaret Hartwell, Special Counsel IRS Criminal Investigation Division. She produced her credentials and held them long enough for Victoria to read them fully. "I have a matter that requires your immediate attention." Victoria looked at the credentials, then at the name. "Hartwell," she said carefully. "That's correct," Maggie said. Victoria's expression shifted a fraction, only the movement of someone locating an inconsistency they had not prepared for. Edward had never mentioned a sister. In 18 years, not once. She had assumed there was no one. That had been one of the foundations of the plan, that he was in, the ways that mattered alone. He had not been alone. He simply hadn't known it yet. She opened the document case and removed a single document. The freeze order IRS-20-25-HOU-01474 pages. Signed by a federal magistrate at 9:58 a.m. She set it on the bedside table in front of Victoria. "Effective as of 10 a.m. this morning, all assets held in your name, personal accounts, corporate vehicles, and affiliated shell entities are frozen pending criminal investigation." Victoria looked at the document. She did not touch it. "On what basis?" she said. Her voice was entirely steady. The performance was still running. "Wire fraud, embezzlement of corporate assets, and conspiracy charges," Maggie said. "The investigation covers 43 transactions totaling $42 million over 4 years, plus a wire transfer of $200,000 made to a corporate attorney on Monday of this week." A silence. "You said your name is Hartwell," Victoria said. "Yes." "Are you related to—" "Edward Hartwell is my brother," Maggie said. "I've been investigating the financial irregularities in his company for 14 months. I was not aware of the personal connection until recently." She paused. "That connection does not affect the validity of the investigation or the freeze order. Both were reviewed and approved by independent federal oversight. Victoria looked at the document, at Maggie, at the door. "I need to call my attorney," she said. "Of course," Maggie said pleasantly. "You have that right." She did not move from where she was standing. I stood up from the wheelchair at 10:17. Slowly, deliberately. Without assistance, I had told the orderly before we left the pre-op area that I would not need him for what came next. He had looked uncertain. I had looked at him until the uncertainty resolved into compliance. The corridor outside, room 412, was quiet. Maggie had texted me 2 minutes earlier. "She's inside, reading the freeze order. Come now." I walked to the door and opened it. Victoria was standing beside the bed with the freeze order in her hand and her phone pressed to her ear. She turned when the door opened. She saw me upright, moving without assistance, wearing the hospital gown, but standing with the posture of a man who had never been as diminished as she believed. She lowered the phone. The call she had been making went to voicemail. "Edward," she said. The word came out differently than it ever had before. Not warm, not performed, just the sound of a name leaving a mouth that had run out of context for it. I crossed the room and stood beside Maggie. Victoria looked from me to my sister and back again. I watched her assemble the picture, the shared jaw, the gray-green eyes, the particular way we both held ourselves when we were certain of something. "Yet you were never in the OR, she said. "No," I said. "Ate the transplant." "Wednesday night," I said. 48 hours ago. Full documentation, NMDP filing chain of custody. Everything legal and complete." I paused. "The procedure this morning was theater, designed specifically to give Marcus a reason to be in the staging area with the substituted container." She looked at the freeze order in her hand. "The pueblo," she said. "It's void," I said. "Page 34, subsection G. Walsh embedded the clause at my instruction. The document you filed at the board meeting yesterday had no legal effect from the moment it was signed." "Walsh," she said. "Not a question, a calculation completing itself." "Walsh cooperated fully," I said. "As did Marcus as of approximately 40 minutes ago. He provided 47 minutes of video recorded in his penthouse, your voice, your instructions, your plan in its entirety, in exchange for a reduced plea agreement." Victoria set the freeze order on the bedside table. She looked at me for a long moment, the longest we had looked at each other, perhaps since the early years of our marriage, when looking at each other still meant something mutual. "You planned all of this," she said, "from the beginning." "From the third night before my admission," I said, "when I heard you on the phone with Marcus." A silence. "How much did you know?" she said. "Enough," I said, and then Maggie knew the rest. Victoria looked at my sister, at the IRS lanyard, at the freeze order on the table. "You were never dying," she said to me. "I was always dying," I said. "I simply refused to do it on your schedule." Claire was in the hallway with her phone. She had been there since 10:05, positioned near the nurse's station, with the particular invisibility she had perfected over 6 years present, but unremarkable the kind of person a room full of people looks past without deciding to. She was not invisible today. Today she was the last component of a mechanism that had been assembling itself for 6 weeks. Maggie stepped into the hallway at 10:23, leaving me alone with Victoria for the 90 seconds the next step required. She looked at Claire and nodded once. She walked back into room 412 and stood near the door, her phone in her hand, not filming, not broadcasting, simply present. A witness. The last person in the room who had been there from the very beginning. Maggie returned 30 seconds later. She stood beside the door. Maggie stepped forward and set a single document on the bedside table beside the freeze order. "This is a signed authorization from the U.S. Attorney's Office approved at 9:40 a.m. this morning. A federal judge reviewed and approved public disclosure of the wiretap recordings on grounds of public interest under 18 U.S.C. Section 2518, subsection 8DE. Everything you are about to hear is already part of the federal public record." Victoria looked at the document, then at Maggie. "What happens next?" she said. "You hear yourself," Maggie said. Victoria looked at her. "What happens next?" Claire raised her phone. The recording began playing through the room's speaker, the wiretap audio from Wednesday evening. Victoria's voice in her car, clear and unambiguous. "I've been patient for 4 years, Marcus. I married a man who built everything from nothing and kept every piece of it locked inside his own hands." Then the penthouse recording Marcus's video, the 47 minutes that were now federal evidence, opened at the section where Victoria had looked at Walsh across the table and said, "Move forward," with the flat composure of someone ordering a routine task. Then the hospital recording Victoria in the family waiting area on Thursday afternoon. "We're simply accelerating a process that has its own momentum." Victoria stood in the middle of room 412 and listened to herself. Her own voice, her own words, her own plans spoken in her own cadence filled the room she had visited every day for 6 weeks under the performance of a grieving wife. She did not speak. She did not move. I watched her face the face I had looked at across 35 years of dinners and boardrooms and private moments, and I saw the exact moment the performance ended. Not dramatically, not with collapse or tears or any of the things that might have made it easier to witness. It ended quietly, like a light being switched off in an empty room. "That's enough," I said. Claire lowered her phone. The room was silent. The federal courthouse on Rusk Street processed Victoria's arraignment on Monday morning. I was not there. Ray had been clear 3 weeks minimum before anything resembling normal activity, and a federal arraignment did not qualify as restful convalescence. Maggie attended in her capacity as IRS special counsel. Quinn handled the prosecution side. Walsh appeared as a cooperative witness, accompanied by his own attorney, looking like a man who had aged considerably in the past 2 weeks, and was quietly grateful to still be in a position to age at all. Maggie called me at noon from the courthouse steps. 6 counts formally entered, she said. Victoria pled, not guilty, expected her defense team is competent, and they'll want discovery before they advise anything else. A pause. Bail was denied. Flight risk given the offshore accounts and the Cayman vehicles. Another pause. She'll be held pending trial. Timeline, I said. Federal trials of this complexity, 18 months minimum before the jury is seated. Possibly 24. She paused. Quinn is confident. The evidence packages, he used the word extraordinary in his brief. I told him it was thorough. He said that was the same thing. It's not the same thing, I said. And no, she agreed, but I let him have it. I heard her moving footsteps on stone, the ambient noise of a downtown street replacing the courthouse acoustics. Walsh, I said. Conditional immunity confirmed this morning, she said. Full cooperation documented federal prosecutor's written acknowledgement on record. No custodial sentence 2 years. Probation mandatory restitution of the $200,000 and permanent disbarment filed with the Texas State Bar. She paused. He's finished in law, but he won't serve time. A pause. He asked me to tell you something. What? That he's sorry, she said. His word, Not a legal statement, not for the record, just sorry. I looked at the window of my hospital room. The Houston skyline, the same view I had been watching for 6 weeks, looked different today in a way I couldn't entirely account for. Tell him I received it, I said. Bellamy, she continued. Arrested Friday afternoon as planned. Separate prosecution, conspiracy, and falsification of medical records. He's cooperating fully. His attorney negotiated a plea within 48 hours. A pause. He's not an evil man. He's a weak one, which in some ways is worse. Ellen Toft, I said, the technician, pled guilty this morning to criminal HIPAA violation and criminal trespass. 18 months possibility of parole at 12. She paused. He has 2 children, Edward. I want you to know I considered that in the recommendation. I said nothing for a moment. Then Maggie, I said. Yes. Thank you, I said, for all of it. The case, the testimony, the all of it. A brief silence. I didn't do it for thanks, she said. And I know, I said. That's why I'm giving it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, get some rest. I'll be there at 6 with dinner that isn't hospital food. What kind? The kind from the place on Westheimer that you've been talking about for 3 days, she said, and she hung up. I returned to Golden Grill headquarters 6 weeks after Friday. Ray had cleared me for limited activity 2 hours, maximum no stares, nothing that qualified as stress. I had agreed to these terms in the specific way I agreed to, most terms I intended to interpret generously. The building was the same, 38 floors of glass and steel in downtown Houston, the Hartwell name on the exterior in the sans serif font. I had chosen myself in 1994 because it looked permanent without looking arrogant. I had stood on the sidewalk below it the morning it was installed and thought this is something that will outlast me. I still believed that. The circumstances that had made it feel uncertain for 6 weeks were resolved. Richard Vance met me in the lobby and rode the elevator with me to 38. He said very little. Richard had always understood that some moments required presence rather than conversation, which was one of the reasons he had been on my board for 20 years. The conference room was full, 7 board members, the legal team, the communications director, Claire sitting at the far end of the table with her laptop open and her expression carrying the particular composure of someone who had been here through everything and was now watching the aftermath with quiet satisfaction. I sat at the head of the table. Thank you for coming, I said. I'll be brief. I presented 3 resolutions. The first, my transition from active chairman and CEO to chairman emeritus effective immediately. The day-to-day operations of Golden Grill would pass to the internal candidate I had been preparing for this role for 3 years. A fact no one in the room except Richard had known until this moment. The second, the establishment of the Hartwell Foundation, funded by a personal contribution of $40 million dedicated to education and housing support for children in foster care and the orphan system across Texas. The foundation's first executive director would be announced within 30 days. I already knew who it would be, but I did not say so in the room. I had asked Claire 3 weeks earlier, while she was filing documents in the hospital hallway, whether she would consider it. She had looked at me for a long moment and said she would need to think about it. She had come back the next morning with her answer before I had finished my coffee. The third, the appointment of Claire Donovan to the Golden Grill Board of Directors, effective immediately filling the vacancy created by Victoria's removal. The room was quiet when I finished. Then Sandra Okafor said, Claire Donovan is 32 years old. Yes, I said. She has no corporate board experience. Yet she has 6 years of experience running the personal and professional operations of a chairman of a $2.4 billion company, I said, during which time she identified and helped dismantle a 4-year financial fraud scheme and coordinated with federal law enforcement across 3 parallel investigations. I paused. I find her qualifications adequate. Sandra looked at Claire. Claire looked at Sandra with the calm, direct attention she gave everything. Sandra nodded once. Seconded, she said. The vote was unanimous. Richard proposed naming the building's main conference room Galveston Hall. That vote was also unanimous. Afterward, I stood alone at the window on 38 and looked down at the sidewalk where I had stood in 1994 watching my name go up on the building. I had built this to be found. I had been found. Maggie signed the lease on a Houston office 6 weeks after the arraignment. The space was on the 4th floor of a building on Travis Street, not large, not particularly impressive, with windows that looked out onto a parking structure and a reception area that currently contained 2 folding chairs and a coffee maker she had brought from her Georgetown apartment. She had packed her Washington life into 11 boxes, which she described as either liberating or alarming, depending on the hour of day. I helped her move on a Saturday. This was, I should note, the first time in 60 years I had helped anyone move. I was also 6 weeks post-transplant with a graft that Ray described as performing exceptionally, which I took as medical clearance to carry boxes of books up 4 flights of stairs. Ray would have disagreed with that interpretation. I did not consult Ray. Claire came with coffee and breakfast from the place on Westheimer. She arranged the coffee maker on the kitchen counter with the efficient precision she brought to everything, and then sat on one of the folding chairs and watched Maggie and me argue about where the bookshelf should go. "Against the window," Maggie said. "The window faces west," I said. "Afternoon sun will damage the spines." "I'm aware of how sun damage works, Edward." "Then you know the bookshelf should go on the interior wall." "The interior wall is where the desk goes." "The desk can go anywhere." "The desk goes on the interior wall," she said, with the flat finality of someone who has been practicing law for 22 years and has stopped entertaining counter-arguments that don't come with case citations. I put the bookshelf against the interior wall. She put the desk by the window. Claire said nothing. She was smiling at her coffee cup in the way she smiled when she found something genuinely funny but had decided not to say so. We worked until 2 in the afternoon, unpacking boxes, assembling furniture that had been shipped from Washington, locating the Ethernet cable that turned out to be in the box labeled kitchen for reasons Maggie declined to explain. At some point, we stopped working and simply sat Maggie on the floor with her back against the bookshelf. Me in the desk chair, Claire on the folding chair eating sandwiches Claire had found somewhere and talking about nothing in particular. Maggie's new firm would specialize in corporate fraud investigation and financial litigation. She had 3 clients already referrals from her Washington network cases that had followed her from D.C. because her reputation had preceded the geography. "You'll be working 80 hours a week," I said. "I worked 80 hours a week in Washington," she said. "Now I'll do it here. Is that better?" She looked around the half-assembled office, the books on the shelves, the desk by the window, Claire finishing the last of her sandwich in the folding chair. "Yes," she said simply. "It's considerably better." I wrote the letter to Victoria on a Tuesday morning, 2 months after her arraignment. Not the version I had written at 3 a.m. in the hospital, that one had been written for myself to close something, and I had kept it. This was a different letter, shorter, more considered, the product of 8 weeks of thinking about what I actually wanted to say to a person I had loved for 18 years, and would spend the rest of my life not entirely understanding. I sat at the desk in my study, the same desk where I had drafted 35 years of contracts and board resolutions and acquisition proposals, and I wrote by hand. The first draft was too long. I set it aside. The second draft was too cold. I set that aside too. The third draft was 4 paragraphs. I read it twice and decided it was accurate, which was the only standard I had left to apply. "Victoria, I have been trying to decide what I owe you in writing and what I owe myself. The answer I arrived at is this honesty, which is the thing we most consistently failed to give each other across 18 years. I loved you, not as a strategy, not as a performance for the room, not as a component of anything I planned in room 412. I loved you in the specific way that a person who grew up without a family loves the first person who chose them completely and somewhat unwisely and with a degree of willful blindness that I take full responsibility for. You did not manufacture that love. It was real. I want you to have that in writing because I think you stopped believing it and the record should be accurate. I also know that you planned this for 4 years before my diagnosis. I know that the woman I married existed alongside the woman who was making those plans and that both of them were real. I have spent 8 weeks deciding whether that makes things better or worse, and I have concluded it makes them simply true. I hope the years ahead give you something worth having. Not money you understood money better than I gave you credit for, and it did not make you happy. Something else. I don't know what. But I mean that without irony, without strategy, without anything except the straightforward wish of a man who is grateful to be alive and has decided that gratitude is incompatible with carrying hatred. Edward. I sealed the envelope and addressed it to her attorney's office, which was the correct channel for correspondence with a person in federal custody. Then I walked it to the mailbox at the end of the block myself. The afternoon was clear, a late February day in Houston, cool and bright, the kind the city produces reluctantly before surrendering to warmth. It behaved for once like autumn, still unhurried, and entirely indifferent to everything that had happened in the past 2 months. I dropped the letter in. I walked back to the house. I did not think about it again. The Galveston branch opened on a Saturday in March. We drove down together, Maggie and Claire, and I in my car, on the highway that runs along the Gulf Coast, with the water visible on the right side for most of the journey. Maggie read case files for the first 40 minutes. Claire managed the communications from the corporate team, coordinating the opening. I drove and said nothing and watched the flat Texas landscape move past the windows. At some point, Maggie closed her laptop and looked at the water. "I used to drive this road," she said, "on cases, before I knew." "Then I know," I said. "You told me." 11 locations, she said. 11 locations, I confirmed. Claire looked out her window and said nothing. She was smiling again in the way she smiled when she found something genuinely moving, but had decided the moment belonged to other people. The branch was on Seawall Boulevard, a corner location glass-fronted with a clear view of the Gulf from the dining room. The exterior signage read, "Golden Grill, the Galveston," in the standard corporate font, with one addition a small plaque beside the entrance that read, "Established in honor of St. Augustine Children's Home, 1971. I had written the plaque text myself. The communications team had suggested something more elaborate. I had declined. 300 people came to the opening. Local residents, Golden Grill staff from the Houston region, a photographer from the Chronicle. Richard Vance was there, Sandra Okafor. Walsh was not, which was appropriate, and which I did not remark upon. Maggie and I cut the ribbon together. No speech. I had told the communications team specifically, no prepared remarks, no podium, no microphone. If a reporter wanted a quote, they could ask me directly and I would give them one sentence. A reporter from the Chronicle asked. I gave her one sentence. "I built this company so that someone could find me, and she did, and this branch is where we started." She wrote it down and looked up. "Who found you?" I looked at Maggie, who was standing 3 feet away talking to a Hartwell Foundation board member, with the focused efficiency she brought to every conversation. "My sister," I said. The reporter wrote that down too. After the crowds thinned, we walked, the three of us, to the end of Seawall Boulevard, where the road curves and the Gulf opens up fully, no buildings interrupting the horizon. The water was gray-green in the afternoon light, the color of a particular pair of eyes I had been looking for since 1971. Maggie stood at the seawall with her hands in her jacket pockets and looked at the water for a long time. "We should go back to St. Augustine," she said. "The address." "And next week," I said. "You said that last week." "Next week," I said again. She looked at me sideways. "I'll put it in the calendar." "Does it do that?" And I said. She did. 3 months after Friday, I made coffee at 6:15 in the morning. This was not unusual. I had made coffee at 6:15 every morning for 30 years. The same process, the same proportions, the same cup I had used since the Beaumont Diner days. A heavy ceramic mug with a hairline crack along the handle that I had never replaced because replacing it had never seemed necessary. What was unusual was that when I carried the second cup to the kitchen table, someone was already sitting there to receive it. Maggie had arrived the night before. She kept a drawer of things at my house. Now, a development that had occurred organically over 3 months, without either of us remarking on it. She was reading the morning paper, with the focused attention she gave everything, her laptop closed for once, her glasses pushed up into her hair. She accepted the coffee without looking up. "Thank you." "You're welcome," I said. I sat across from her and opened the business section. We read in silence for 7 minutes, the particular comfortable silence of people who have established a rhythm together and no longer need to fill it. Claire arrived at 7 with a box of muffins from the bakery on the corner. She had been doing this on Saturdays for 3 months, which had begun as a professional habit and had become something else without announcement. She set the box on the table, poured her own coffee, and sat in the third chair. Maggie looked up from the paper. "The Kellerman brief," she said to Claire. "Did Quinn's office send the supplementary filing?" "Whoa." "Yesterday afternoon," Claire said. "I forwarded it to your office email. I'll look at it after breakfast." "You'll look at it now," Claire said pleasantly. "I know how you work." Maggie looked at her over her coffee cup. "You've been spending too much time with your—" She stopped, reorganized. "You've absorbed some of Edward's habits." "Which ones?" I said. "At the ones where you say you'll do something later and mean immediately," Maggie said. Claire and I looked at each other across the table. "That's accurate," Claire said. "It's efficient," I said. Maggie returned to her paper. We sat like that for another 40 minutes, reading, talking about nothing important, finishing the muffins. The morning light came through the kitchen window in the flat horizontal way of early Texas sun, landing across the table in a stripe that moved slowly as the hour progressed. At some point, I set my paper down and looked at the two of them, Maggie with her glasses still pushed into her hair, Claire making notes in the margin of a document she had produced from her bag. And I thought about the 60 years that had preceded this kitchen table. The cot in St. Augustine, the group home in Houston, the strip mall in Beaumont with the hand-painted sign. All of it had been in service of something I couldn't have named then. I could name it now. The Hartwell Foundation opened its doors on the first Monday of April. The building was on the west side of Houston, a converted warehouse transformed into something that felt both purposeful and welcoming. I had written that word specifically in the architect's brief welcoming. I remembered what it felt like to be a child, in a building that felt only purposeful. The architect had understood. She had delivered exactly that. 12 children arrived on the first day, ages 5 through 10, each referred through the Texas foster system. They came in carrying the particular careful stillness of children who have learned not to expect too much from new places, that specific economy of hope that develops when hope has been extended and withdrawn enough times that rationing it becomes instinct. I knew that stillness. I had worn it myself for years in buildings not unlike this one. Maggie and I stood in the main hall while the foundation staff showed the children the building, the library, the dining room with its round tables round, because round tables have no head and no foot, and everyone seated at one is equally present. The courtyard with the oak tree the architect had incorporated rather than removed, because some things that have survived long enough deserve to remain. 11 children followed the staff. One did not. She was 5 years old, dark-haired, with the kind of eyes that take in a room completely before deciding what to do with what they have found. She stood alone in the middle of the main hall after the group moved on, looking at everything with a focused, unhurried attention that I recognized immediately. She looked at the ceiling, at the courtyard window, at the bookshelves visible through the library door. Then she looked at me. Then she looked at my left wrist. "What's that?" she said. I looked down at the red thread, the one I had tied for myself 7 months ago, faded now from bright red to something softer, the color of things worn every day without being removed. I crouched to her level. "It's a way of remembering," I said, "that you belong somewhere." She considered this with the seriousness that 5-year-olds bring to things that matter to them, not skepticism, not performance, the genuine weight of a child deciding whether something is true. "Where do you belong?" she said. I looked up. Maggie was standing 6 feet away watching this exchange with the expression she used when something reached her that she hadn't prepared for. Her hands were in her jacket pockets. On her left wrist below the cuff, the 55-year-old thread caught the morning light pale, now nearly white, the knot still tight after all this time. "Here," I said. "I belong here." The girl looked at the thread a moment longer. Then she held out her left wrist, small, deliberate, the gesture of someone who has made a decision and intends to see it through. I reached into my jacket pocket. I had put the thread there that morning without fully understanding why a length of new red thread wound around 2 fingers tucked where I kept things I needed available. Standing here now, I understood it was not habit. It was intention that had arrived before the reason did. I tied it around her wrist, the same knot, the double loop with the tuck I had invented at 5 years old, in a room that smelled of floor wax and salt air. The knot I had never taught to anyone, because the only person who needed to recognize it had been wearing it for 55 years. She looked at the thread, turned her wrist once, looked at mine. Then she ran to catch the group, her dark hair disappearing around the corner of the hallway, the new red thread bright against her wrist. Maggie came and stood beside me. We watched the empty hallway together. "She didn't ask your name," Maggie said quietly. "No," I said. She just held out her wrist. "Yes." A long moment passed between us, the kind that does not need to be filled. "It's same knot," Maggie said. I looked at her. "Same knot." She looked at her own wrist, at the thread that had survived a fire and 55 years, and the long, careful distance between 2 people who had been looking for each other without knowing it. Then she looked down the hallway where the girl had gone. She looked at the girl's wrist until the hallway was empty. Then she looked at mine. Neither of us said anything. Some things do not need to be named to be understood. The sun was going down over Houston when I finally sat alone. Maggie had left at 5, a client call she had rescheduled twice already, and could not reschedule a third time, because Maggie did not reschedule things a third time. Claire had driven her to the office on Travis Street and stayed to help with the filing, which meant the house was quiet in the way it had not been quiet for 6 months. I sat on the back porch with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The Houston skyline was changing color in the way it did at this hour, the steel towers catching the last flat light of the day and holding it briefly before releasing it. The sky moving through the particular sequence of oranges and grays that the Gulf Coast produces better than anywhere else I had ever been. I had watched this same sequence from the window of room 412 every evening for 6 weeks. It looked different from a porch. Everything looked different when you were no longer pretending to be dying. I turned my left wrist over and looked at the red thread. It was 6 months old now, the one I had tied for myself, the one Maggie had noticed on my first day in the hospital and recognized before she recognized anything else. The color had faded from bright red to something softer, rose adjacent the way things fade when they are worn every day without being removed. I had not removed it. Maggie's was 55 years old. The girl's was 6 hours old. I thought about chains of things the way one act extends forward through time and becomes something its origin could not have predicted. A 5-year-old boy pulling thread from his shirt, hem in a children's home on Avenue K in Galveston, not because he understood what he was doing, but because he had nothing else to give, and giving something felt necessary. 55 years of that thread, worn through a fire, through an adoption, through a law degree, and a career, and 22 years of federal cases arriving eventually at a hospital room in Houston, where it was recognized by the only person in the world who knew what the knot meant. And now, a girl of 5, with dark hair and careful eyes, wearing a new one, running down a hallway, in a foundation that had not existed 6 months ago, carrying forward something that had started before she was born. I had spent 60 years believing that the things you build are the evidence of who you are. The restaurants, the contracts, the company with its name on 38 floors of glass and steel. I had believed that making something permanent was the same as meaning something that you could construct your way out of the particular emptiness of a childhood without witnesses. I understood now that I had been right about the building and wrong about what it was for. I had not built Golden Grill to prove anything. I had built it so someone could find me. And the measure of everything I had built was not the $2.4 billion valuation, or the 340 locations, or the Hartwell name on the Houston skyline. The measure was Maggie at a Galveston seawall, looking at water, the color of her eyes, putting a case file in her bag, and saying next week about an address on Avenue K. The measure was Claire setting a coffee cup in front of a person at 6:15 in the morning for 6 years without being asked. The measure was a 5-year-old girl running down a hallway with a red thread on her wrist belonging somewhere for the first time. The coffee was completely cold. I drank the last of it anyway. Behind me, the house was quiet, the specific quiet of a house that has people in it regularly, now that has developed the accumulated warmth of a place where the same people return, where a drawer in the guest room contains someone's reading glasses and a phone charger and a novel with a bookmark 3/4 of the way through. I had not had a house like that before, not in 60 years. I looked at the skyline one last time as the light went completely. There are things that take 50 years to find, and when you find them, you understand that time was never the enemy, it was simply the distance between where you started and where you were always supposed to arrive. I had started in a building that burned down. I had arrived here, on this porch, in this quiet, with a cold cup of coffee and a red thread on my wrist, and the absolute certainty, the first absolute certainty of my life, that had nothing to do with strategy or planning, or the careful management of outcomes, that I was exactly where I belonged. I closed my eyes. The Gulf wind came in from the south, the way it always did at this hour. I let it. I am 60 years old. I built an empire and nearly lost everything, not to illness, but to 18 years of trusting the wrong person, while the right ones were waiting just outside the door. Here is what I learned. God does not waste people. He places them in your path at exactly the right moment. Not the moment you want, but the moment you are ready. Maggie was always mine. I simply had to survive long enough to find her. Do not do what I did. Do not confuse comfort with love. Do not put your name on buildings and forget to build a home inside your own life. And never, never wait 50 years to walk through a door that was never locked. The greatest lesson this story gave me achievement is not belonging. A man can own 300 restaurants and still eat alone. Family is not blood. Family is who ties the knot and keeps it. Trust the thread, even when you cannot see where it leads. If this story touched something in you, share it, leave a comment, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for staying until the very last word. It means everything. The stories ahead contain fictional elements built for reflection and growth. If that's not right for you today, choose what serves your soul. No judgment, only respect.